Chapter 437. Suddenly, the howling wind in the air grew louder and more ferocious. All of the pursuers were shocked to see this scene. They all gave the order to stop their pursuit. What was the point of giving chase now? Could they destroy the wind and clouds, but could they destroy the water and fire? Right now, Zio's army no longer had the ability to kill Supreme Cloud. This was a fact that Zio's army did not want to admit, but they had to. Even though they had stopped, the changes in the sky did not stop. For a moment, the wind blew and the clouds surged as countless dark clouds began to converge. Bolts of lightning streaked across the sky like giant silver snakes. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew and lightning flashed. It was as if the heavens had been extremely enraged by something, striking down on the tens of thousands of soldiers. A voice spoke faintly in the air. Perhaps it's been too long since you've tasted this feeling? Use your lives to savor it. You can do anything. However, no matter what you do, don't cross the bottom line of being human. Clouds were made of water, but they were lighter than water, floating above the 9 heavens. Ever since Yun Yang had cultivated the holy water charm, he had a deeper understanding of his cloud manifestation cultivation method. Furthermore, after his trip to the lunar river and his cultivation of the holy water charm to the 2nd stage, he had achieved a new level of advancement. Strictly speaking, it should be the combination of the various divine arts to further improve. Using his cloud manifestation cultivation method as a base and the holy water charm as a guide, Yun Yang had conjured boundless dark clouds, stirring up the wind and thunder to form the current storm, lightning and rumbling thunder. It was a combination of the 4 manifestation powers. In the past, Yun Yang had turned into dark clouds as well, but it had mostly been to deceive others and conceal his tracks. This time, with the aid of the holy water charm, the dark clouds he had conjured were truly dark clouds. They stretched endlessly and were the pivot that connected the wind and thunder. With a furious roar in the sky, lightning bolts came crashing down from the sky. Countless lightning bolts filled the sky in an instant and rained down like a torrential rain. The army that had gathered here immediately fell into chaos. Even the warhorses that had been trained for a long time were extremely terrified when faced with this sudden change in the weather. They ran and jumped uncontrollably, trampling all over the place. Countless soldiers were struck by the lightning bolts. Those who were covered in wounds and blood were considered lucky. There were even more who were turned into charcoal. After a while, the wind in the air grew stronger. Zio's soldiers were thrown off their feet, unable to stand or open their eyes. Many of them were sent rolling on the ground by the wind. Under such circumstances, the lightning bolts were still falling from the sky. The situation was extremely dire. No, the dire situation that Zio's soldiers had to face was not the worst yet. While countless soldiers were struggling to move and had fallen into an unprecedented state of chaos, the ground was changing as well. The surface temperature rose rapidly and the layer of snow that had piled up on the ground melted continuously. In the span of a few breaths, there were patches of grass exposed on the ground while the surrounding trees were drying out rapidly. With a strange bang, a ball of flame suddenly appeared. Then this ball of flame spread out and in the blink of an eye, it was like a prairie fire. From Supreme Cloud's traceless figure to the sudden change in the weather, dark clouds covered the sky, wind and thunder converged, and finally, a single spark ignited the prairie. The entire process took less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. Tens of thousands of Zio soldiers were in a state of chaos. There was no longer any discipline to speak of. In a trance, Supreme Cloud's figure suddenly reappeared in front of them. He was still dressed in the same cotton robes as before, advancing quietly like a carriage. His speed was still not very fast. However, no one dared to chase after him. The Zio mystic cultivators who had chased him out of the city stood where they were, their expressions complicated. None of them dared to move recklessly. Such a celestial phenomenon was proof that Supreme Cloud's divine powers had been restored and that he had truly cultivated the divine powers of the other 9 Supremes. Moreover, he had integrated them and mastered them so effortlessly that he could command them as if they were his own limbs. Faced with such a Supreme Cloud, no one in this world dared to say that they could act recklessly. "I'll be back in an hour." A cold voice that was filled with boundless cruelty came from afar. "I hope that by then, there'll be someone here who can talk to me. I believe that all of you know what I want." Before his words echoed in the air, Supreme Cloud disappeared once more. However, everyone stood rooted to the ground, dumbstruck as if they had lost their minds. Countless people were thinking, what does he want? What does his last sentence mean? What do we know? What does he believe in us? Supreme Cloud, this devil, what is he talking about? In spite of this, some of the quick-witted generals were alarmed and sent the news back without stopping. The news was too important. If Supreme Cloud came later and could not give an answer, the consequences would be unimaginable. The chaos just now was only a warning from Supreme Cloud. He had yet to unleash his full strength and was not relentless in his pursuit of death. In that case, what he wanted was even more important. The generals were already terrified. If he could not produce it when the time came, the consequences would be unimaginable. Zilong City was in an unprecedented state of chaos, as if it had gone through a calamity. The battle had almost destroyed half of Zilong City. Everywhere was a scene of devastation and debris. The devastation of the situation was almost unbearable. It was the end of the world. Supreme Cloud had entered the city and caused so much destruction in this battle. Furthermore, this was under the premise that Supreme Cloud was not in his best condition and had not used the powers he was adept in. If Supreme Cloud were to seek revenge, would the situation be even worse? Supreme Cloud, the brainchild of the 9 Supremes, was truly a devil, a demon that brought disaster to the world. The people in the city and the pursuing troops outside the city came to the same conclusion. Perhaps Supreme Cloud, Yunyang, had used his actions to prove the evaluation of Zio's people and everyone else in the world other than Yutong's people. Devil. The empire of Zio's emperor was standing at the highest point of Zilong City's building, looking down at the ruins around him wordlessly. He could not help closing his eyes slowly as he looked at the blood and minced flesh that stretched for dozens of miles. All he could hear were innumerable moans of agony. At this moment, the emperor of Zio, who had once been praised by Yunyang as a great strategist, felt waves of helplessness. It was a sense of helplessness and disappointment that came from the bottom of his heart. His gaze was a little hollow, a little unfocused, a little helpless, but it was mostly resentment and sorrow. After a while, his gaze slowly swept across the faces of the 20 officials beside him. Zio's think tank, the head of the civil officials, the Chancellor Lan Wuxin, was also dumbfounded. His face was ashen, as if he had aged 100 years within a day. It was an expression that said there was nothing left to live for. The emperor of the Empire of Zio knew very well that the source of this incident was the trouble caused by the children of a few noble families who had gone out of the city to hunt. The Chancellor Lan Wuxin was the culprit of this incident. It was this old thing who had single-handedly invited his enemy, Supreme Cloud, into the heavily guarded Zilong City. It was also him who had confirmed that Supreme Cloud was the phantom physician, god of wine, Feng Xiang'e. It was also him who had instigated the emperor to save Feng Xiang'e in hopes of recruiting him to serve Zio. It was also him who had sent the imperial treasure, the heart of Siderite, along with the imperial jade seal, to the enemy. The imperial treasure had been destroyed on the spot. Although the imperial jade seal had been returned in perfect condition, what had actually happened? Elder Yun had said that he wanted to steal the empire of Zio's fortune. It was most likely true. He would not have been so kind as to only take 1/10 of it. He had most likely taken all of it. In the end, it was still him who had personally escorted Supreme Cloud to the Board of Justice to meet the assassin. It was him, it was all him. Chancellor Lan Wuxin was to blame for everything that had happened. To say that such a crime was so heinous that even death could not atone for it was already the lightest of punishments. His entire family should be executed, his 9 generations of family annihilated. If it had been in the past, the Emperor of Zio would have killed Lan Wuxin long ago, executing his entire family. Now, however, he had no idea what was going on. He had no intention of holding Lan Wuxin accountable at all. He even felt a tinge of sympathy for him. After a while, the Emperor of Zio's gaze turned from lifeless to sharp and dangerous like a hawk. Chapter 438. It was not until all the civil and military officials lowered their heads that the Zio Emperor spoke. Only then did the Emperor of Zio's voice ring out calmly, devoid of any emotion. Ever since I've ascended the throne, I've always been confident. I thought that I had the heart to rule over the world, the will to conquer heaven and earth, the ability to reorganize the universe, the power to conquer Tianxian, and the plan to conquer the world. I've never been as disappointed as I am today. The Emperor of Zio's faint voice suddenly turned violent as he roared, "It's not just disappointment. It's despair." Despair, do you understand? The Emperor of Zio's voice was like an injured beast, growling in grief and indignation. For so many years, I've always thought that I'm not inferior to the empire of Yutong's emperor, Yu Peiza. I might even surpass him. I even despise him for not being able to conquer the world despite having such strong support from the 9 Supremes. If the 9 Supremes were in Zio, I would have conquered Tianxian a long time ago. Before this, I've always thought so. I've always thought that God is unfair. Why did the 9 heavens domain land in Yutang back then? Why didn't it land in Zio? But today I know that I've been wrong. Gravely wrong. The Emperor of Zio's voice was slightly shaky. He took in a deep breath to steady his voice and resumed his calm tone. Today I've seen the difference. The entire Zilong city has been emptied of its citizens and a dragnet has been set up. There's also a spiritual restraining formation that specifically targets the 9 Supreme's powers. Yet, it can't hold back a Supreme Cloud who's not fully capable. The Emperor of Zio asked in anguish, "Let me ask all of you. Does Zio really not have the ability to hold back Supreme Cloud?" His gaze swept across each and every one of them as he asked in a heavy tone, "Even if we Zilong City mustering all of Zio's combat power, can't we really take down a Supreme Cloud like this? A 1,000,000-strong army, the heart of the Empire, the spiritual restraining formation, the dragnet." His voice became heavier and heavier. "Can't you even trap one person to death? Can't you capture him or capture him? What's more, this person would have to jump out brazenly and start a head-on battle, fighting one against many, fighting one against 10,000. Can we let him escape? Can't hold him back?" All the ministers' faces were ashen as they lowered their heads, but no one dared to say a word of explanation. Luckily, no one is trying to quibble and come up with all sorts of reasons to say that there are various reasons why Supreme Cloud was able to break out of the encirclement. At least all of you have some dignity left. Not bad, we are all people with pride. I refuse to believe this result. But today it has been proven that we can't hold him back. I didn't manage to make him stay. Under the siege of the 1,000,000-strong army and the encirclement of Zio's top-notch experts, the enemy managed to escape unscathed. You come and go as you please. You're free and at ease as if you've entered an uninhabited realm. Just now, I really felt humiliated just now. But now I am very clear in my heart. What is there to be humiliated? Isn't it a foreseeable possibility? This is what I should do. We should have known and foreseen it from the beginning. If Supreme Cloud couldn't leave and couldn't escape unscathed, it would be the strangest thing in the world if we captured him instead. That would be God being blind. The Emperor of Zio hollered like a thunderclap. Hearing the Emperor of Zio's words, all the officials subconsciously shuddered, guessing why His Majesty would be so enraged. Everyone was shaken to the core. Still no one dared to speak. No matter what they said now, it would be futile. I've always thought that the Empire of Zio's military power was the best in the world, that the sharpness of our army was unparalleled. We had all the conditions to unite the world, but due to Yutang's superior geographical location and the fact that we've produced so many talented generals, we haven't been able to expand our territory. Even when we've exhausted our forces every year, attacked every year and returned empty-handed every year, the time has yet to come. Heaven can't always be watching over Yutang, can't always have good generals. I've always thought that the Empire of Zio has many noble families, their martial prowess is formidable, their thousands of years of heritage is the Empire's foundation, the Empire's strong support. But the truth has proven me wrong. I've taken it for granted. That's not the Empire's foundation, it's not the Empire's strong support. It's only the power of each of your noble families. It's only your foundation. I've always thought that my ability wouldn't pale in comparison to Yutang's Emperor Upeza, but today's reality has made me realize that compared to him, I'm still far behind. I've always thought that as long as Supreme Cloud enters the city, he'll be a bird in a cage, a fish in a net, a prisoner. But the truth has shown me that I've been wrong again. I've always thought that the Empire of Zio is our homeland, that we should work together to protect it. But the truth has proven me wrong. This is still my wishful thinking. This empire belongs to me alone, it has nothing to do with all of you. It's beneficial to have it, but there's no harm in losing it. There's nothing to be concerned about. The Emperor of Zio's voice grew colder and more sinister. The Empire of Zio has the King of Spears, the King of Swords, the King of Sabers, the King of Staff, the King of Spears, the King of Whips, the King of Fists, and the King of Hidden Weapons. Renowned martial artists, legends of mystical cultivators. The Empire of Zio has 10 kings who dominate the world, dominating Tianxian. The Empire of Zio actually has the King of Swords, the King of Sabers, the King of Fists, and the King of Fists. So many mighty names. What domineering nicknames. They make me feel so King awesome. I'm honored. The Emperor of Zio was the only one who cursed for the first time in his life in a tone that was filled with uncontrollable rage and hatred. It was vulgar. It was undisguised and unpretentious. The Empire of Zio doesn't have these kings and saints. Even if there were, there would only be 1 or 2 at most. Each person had 2 people. But the Empire of Zio has at least dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. With such a formidable martial force, why can't we become the world's hegemon? The reason is simple. It's all of you. The Emperor of Zio stood up, his fingers trembling as he pointed at them one by one, his gaze filled with resentment. You, and you. Dino Lan Wuxin is the most guilty in this matter, but I haven't punished him until now. What? Why do you think it is? Because no matter how wrong Lan Wuxin was, his heart and his original intention were all for the Empire's good. He was loyal to the Empire without a shred of ulterior motives. He had contributed all of his family's combat power in this ambush of Supreme Cloud. Of course, he had the mentality to make up for his mistakes, but he did his best. He was the only one who did it without holding anything back. On the other hand, what about all of you? Where have all the kings and saints under you gone to? Is there anyone who came to help? I'm really muddle-headed. Wasn't there still a King of Swords? It wasn't that there wasn't anyone who came to help, but that King of Swords died like an idiot. What kind of help was that? Did he come out to make a fool of himself? And then there was the Saint of Swords. He appeared at the last moment and acted. For the first time, there was someone who could injure Supreme Cloud severely, but it was too late. What the F***ck were they doing earlier? Why couldn't they have acted earlier? It was such a good opportunity, even I could see it clearly. The Emperor of Zio roared. There are still many top experts and super cultivators who haven't shown their faces yet. None of them have appeared. All of the Empire of Zio's top-notch combat power has been gathered by your families and shelved. Even when the Empire's survival was at stake, you would never have brought them out. Even when you saw Supreme Cloud strutting around and mocking Zio, even when you saw Supreme Cloud leaving unscathed, you still wouldn't have brought them out. Because this Supreme Cloud is very strong. If you had brought out your secret top-notch combat power, they might have been in danger, they might have died. Once those experts died, it would be your family's combat power that would be affected, your family's overall capability would be affected. Is that so? Even if the Empire of Zio were to fall, as long as your family still have these forces, they can still do as they please in the new dynasty, exchanging for riches and glory. Their rights will not be reduced. Is that so? All of you can still live happily. Even if the Empire of Zio were to fall, all of you wouldn't have to die except for me. All you have to do is kneel and kowtow, say a few words, acknowledge another emperor in name, and all of you can still enjoy high positions and generous salaries, be dukes and marquises for generations to come. Therefore, this empire has always belonged to me. It belongs to me alone. It's not yours at all. Naturally, I wouldn't care about your concern. Today I finally thought it through. I've thought it through. Yingai Heiyu. Chapter 439. The Emperor of Zio was like a wounded lion, glaring fiercely at the civil and military officials present. I used to laugh at Yutong's emperor. He didn't have many noble families with strong foundations under him. Even when he had the help of some, they were all loyal to the empire, like the Lung family, the Shangguan family of generals, and the Fang family. However, these noble families had all lost their bloodlines in the years of war. There was no one to carry on their legacy, only a legend remains. But what was the meaning of such a legend? What was its value? I used to think that they no longer had any superior martial power, that they were a pile of loose sand. They were only waiting for a suitable opportunity to disperse with a single strike. How could the Tower of Sand survive for long? But today I finally know what Upeza has. I am truly envious and jealous of him. I was wrong. I was wrong from the very beginning. I was gravely wrong, so wrong that I can't explain myself. It's not that they don't have the so-called noble families with strong foundations, it's because Yutong's noble families have all died fighting for the empire. If it weren't for their sacrifice, how could Yutong, who was surrounded by enemies on all sides, have held on until now? To have the support of such noble families, to have such loyal officials, how can I not be envious and jealous? In the past, I was very fortunate that Zio still had so many elite martial artists. Zio would never have to worry, never to fall. Now, I know the truth, I know the reality. It turns out that these elite martial artists in my eyes, the experts who guard Zio, are all cowards who are afraid of death. The reason they can live for so long is because they've never gone to the battlefield. They don't dare to go to the battlefield, that's why they've survived. Because they've never contributed to the empire, never contributed, never sacrificed. Of course they can survive. The so-called casualties of Zio's warriors, the gains and losses of Zio's land, and the empire of Zio's honor and disgrace, none of these matters mattered to them. Of course they could survive. Living a peaceful life is the way to immortality. Therefore they who have always existed in this world have become kings. What kind of sages are they? Then they have become your watchdogs. You heard me right. I've thought about it before. The nine heavens domain was indeed in Zio and not Yutong. I would have long unified the world. But now that I think about it, I was wrong. Indeed, the nine heavens domain had fallen into Zio back then. With so many powerful aristocratic families in my country, how could I have protected this piece of land? I have long lost my empire. If my Zio were to be attacked by 5 enemies like Yutong, how could I have defended myself? Not to mention 8 to 10 years, 3 to 5 years, even if it is only a year and a half, I have no confidence. Yet, Yutong has been able to stand guard until now. Their ambition to conquer Tianxian has never died. What right do I have to be mentioned in the same breath as Emperor of Yutong, Yupeza? The difference is too great, too great. Such an Emperor of Yutong. Extreme admiration. King Hell, what a great emperor, what a great ruler. The Emperor of Zio screamed at the top of his lungs, this is a King great emperor. Who, Emperor of Zio was panting heavily. None of the 20 or so ministers present dared to raise their heads to speak. The main thing was that he had nothing to say. Indeed, what the Emperor of Zio had said was the undeniable truth. Zio's military might could not keep Supreme Cloud, who had all his powers sealed away. What kind of joke was this? It was impossible. However, there were still hundreds of thousands of troops attacking from all sides. The encirclement was so tight that not even a fly could escape. Could Supreme Cloud have ascended to heaven? Everyone was thinking that they should wait a little longer. Perhaps, the experts of the other families would have made their move and taken care of Supreme Cloud. The risk of loss would be borne by the other families. It was enough as long as they did not suffer any losses. As long as their combat power could be preserved, they might even be able to annex other forces and territories after this war. Just like that, they waited and waited, until when everyone felt that things were not looking good and began to make their move, Supreme Cloud had ascended to heaven. They were only a short distance away from leaving the city. They were only one step away from it. By then it would be too late to do anything. It would be too late to even regret it. Selfish. Self-serving. These 2 points had ruined the Empire of Zio's chance to completely destroy the 9 Supremes. The Emperor of Zio was remorseful. Lan Wuxin, Chancellor Lan, you've done your best in dealing with Supreme Cloud. The Emperor of Zio said softly, I don't blame you. Lan Wuxin sobbed, tears streaming down his face. I'm only curious now. The Emperor of Zio said with his eyes closed, the Emperor of Yutong, Yupeza, how did he withstand the storm from all sides? I ask myself if I were in his shoes, how would I have handled it? All the civil and martial officials looked ashamed. The Emperor of Zio's harsh words had spoken to the deepest part of everyone's heart. Although it was uncomfortable, it made sense. This was the truth. Many of them were ashamed and regretful. Just like what had been said earlier, it was too late. If regret was useful, there would not be so many regrets in this world. The Emperor of Zio's voice came faintly, everyone, I've spoken my mind. Now it's your turn to ask yourselves, if things were to start over, would you still do the same? The civil and martial officials were shaken when they heard him, thoughts running through their minds. That's right, if things were to start over, what would we do? No matter how much they thought about it, no one made a sound. Some of them even lowered their heads in shame. Obviously, even if things were to start over, there might not be anyone or any family that would come to their aid. The Emperor of Zio sighed helplessly at the sight before him, a bitter smile hanging on his face. My officials, my arms, my backbone, my empire. Suddenly someone came in with a report. Your Majesty, Supreme Cloud didn't leave immediately after arriving outside the city. He said that he would return after an hour. What did he say exactly? The Emperor of Zio asked in a low voice. Supreme Cloud said, I hope that there'll be someone here who can talk to me when the time comes. He also said, I believe you all know what I want. As soon as he said that, all the ministers felt their hearts tremble. Supreme Cloud had barely escaped danger, but he didn't leave immediately. He even wanted to turn back. What else do you want back? What did he want? I believe we know, but what do we know? The Emperor of Zio chuckled coldly and said, Ministers and officials, do you know what he wants? He said that he believes you all know. For a moment the officials were deep in thought. They could not figure it out. He had already left. He actually came back. What did he want? Chapter 440. Someone seemed to have thought of something, but he was filled with shame at the moment, not daring to speak. Don't you want to speak? Do you know why he's so confident that we can give him what he wants? The Emperor of Zio asked again. Still no one spoke. Forget it, there's no need for you to break the mystery. I know. The Emperor of Zio said tiredly, I know what he wants. The officials were silent. The room was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. Supreme Cloud hopes that there's someone he can talk to? The Emperor of Zio breathed in tiredness, his gaze deep. I think that no one in the entire Empire of Zio is more qualified to talk to Supreme Cloud than I am. At least to Supreme Cloud that's the case. Therefore, I've decided to go personally. I want to personally experience Supreme Cloud's extraordinary means. The Emperor of Zio said indifferently, all of you can go as well if you dare to go. Your Majesty, you mustn't. As the saying goes, a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. An official stood up to stop him. Supreme Cloud is cunning and has many dangerous tricks up his sleeves. Your Majesty, with your invaluable status, how can you put yourself in danger? You're thinking too highly of him. The Emperor of Zio said slowly, think highly of him? Just based on today's battle, I think highly of him. Who in the entire Empire of Zio would dare say that they look down on Supreme Cloud? Even the entire Empire of Zio citizens should worship this Emperor. As for the invaluable status, a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall and so on, a hint of mockery hung at the corners of the Emperor of Zio's lips. It's all right. Even if I'm killed by Supreme Cloud on the spot, I'll have no regrets. Just take it that the Empire of Zio has perished today. The words were too serious, too heavy. These officials have sinned. When the ministers heard this, they all knelt on the ground, their bodies trembling. Sin? His Majesty chuckled, wanting to say something but refrained from doing so. It's decided then. Everyone go. The Emperor of Zio said faintly, everyone here, especially the high officials of these noble families, go. Even one less won't do. A gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. You'd better not tarnish the reputation of a gentleman. His gaze was cold and eerie, full of killing intent. If anyone doesn't go today, I will execute their entire family. Do you think I dare or not? Is it possible? The officials originally wanted to persuade him again, but when they heard this, they all shuddered. Looking at the Emperor of Zio's murderous expression and the undisguised ferocity in his eyes, everyone knew that he was not joking. Regardless of life or death, we will definitely accompany your Majesty. Everyone shouted in unison. A mocking smile tugged at the corners of the Emperor of Zio's lips as he said, as long as all of you go, I will be safe. In this world, who would be able to kill me in front of all my officials? I am 100% sure of this. Ah. His last laugh was filled with sorrow. At this moment, no one could understand what this ruler of a nation was feeling. Furthermore, no one knew that his heart had lost all hope and was filled with despair. His heart had already turned completely cold. As the saying went, the power of heaven was unpredictable. Accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. Rulers were all temperamental, and so on. It was also said that the royal family had no kin, that the emperor was cold-blooded, that the ruler was arbitrary, and that he was alone. There was also the saying, when the birds are all gone, the fine bough is hidden. When the cunning hare is dead, the hound is cooked. Countless emperors had disappointed their loyal officials, countless emperors had disappointed their loyal officials, and countless emperors had alienated their officials, in spite of this, the Emperor of Zio could guarantee that throughout the history of all the emperors, there was probably no one who had felt as hopeless and chilled as he was right now. Disheartened. What would an ordinary person do when his heart was chilled? What would a wealthy person do when his heart was chilled? What would a loyal official and good general do when his heart was chilled? There seemed to be people who had studied all of these before because there were many similar cases in history books or life experiences. However, if an emperor's heart was chilled, what would he do? What would he do? No one seemed to have any experience or research on this, right? He let out a self-deprecating laugh and walked out of the room. The officials were speechless and they followed suit. Everyone was thinking about how they could salvage what had happened today. What should I do? No one could imagine what the current emperor of Zio could or would do. For this emperor, there was no such thing as daring or shouldn't. Outside the city, the emperor of Zio stood there naturally, surrounded by troops and officials, as well as the personal guards they brought with them. The mockery at the corner of the Emperor of Zio's lips deepened. That's right, I'm not wrong at all. Once their own safety was involved, wouldn't the Sword King, Saber King, Sword Saint, and Saber Saint all come? Therefore, as long as all of my officials are by my side, no one in this world can kill me. However, this reality made the Emperor feel even more bitterly disappointed. What my ministers care about the most is still their own lives, their own clans, and their own personal interests. What country, mountains and rivers, common people dominating the world. That's my business. This is my own business. The Emperor of Zio stood on a high spot, facing the wind as he gazed into the distance. He suddenly realized that he yearned to meet Supreme Cloud, the legendary Supreme Cloud. To Zio, to any nation other than Yutong, Supreme Cloud was an unmistakable devil. In spite of this, he was Yutong's hero. What he had done was worthy of the word hero. Now, the Emperor of Zio thought that not only was Supreme Cloud a hero of Yutong, but his actions were also heroic in the eyes of any nation, even if it was an enemy. Tens of thousands of people were gathered together, but it was silent. Flags fluttered in the wind, looking like a neat army with a majestic military aura. Such a grand scene was waiting for the arrival of one person. Yutong's Supreme Cloud. The Supreme Cloud who had almost turned the entire Zilong city into ruins. Supreme Cloud had yet to come. An hour had passed. 2 hours had passed. A long time had passed since the promised time. The person who was supposed to come did not come. Your Majesty, let's go back. Supreme Cloud must have fled far away long ago. The so-called meeting is just a feint to attack the heart. A minister stepped forward and said, Absolutely not. The Emperor of Zio said confidently, If you had said this, I wouldn't have come at all because I disdain it. However, since Supreme Cloud has said it, he will definitely come. He will definitely come. This sentence made all the ministers choke and speechless. What did he mean by you wouldn't come if we said it? Disdain it to come. Did you believe Supreme Cloud's words just like that? We've served you for so many years, is this what we get in return? We've been Zio's officials for generations, is this what it's like? Even the most basic trust was gone? Your Majesty. Lan Wuxin took 2 steps forward with his back hunched. Ever since Supreme Cloud's incident broke out, Lan Wuxin had never straightened his back. Your Majesty, be careful with your words. The Emperor of Zio's eyes glinted inexplicably as he said with a smile, I know. He was harsh and sarcastic to those who had done nothing wrong, but to Lan Wuxin, who was the most guilty, he was kind and gentle. This state of affairs displeased all the officials, their dissatisfaction growing. What have we done? If it wasn't for Lan Wuxin's meddling, would the current situation have come to this? If it wasn't for Lan Wuxin, would half of Zilong City have been destroyed? If it wasn't for Lan Wuxin, would 100,000 soldiers have been killed? If it wasn't for Lan Wuxin, now that we're here, why is the culprit unscathed while we have to bear so much blame? Your Majesty, isn't this too unfair? Aren't you being too biased? For a moment, no one said anything, but the resentment in their hearts was already boiling. Time passed quietly, but Supreme Cloud did not come. Just as everyone was about to lose their patience, someone suddenly cried out, What is that? Everyone turned to look at the same time, their expressions changing abruptly. Chapter 441. As the crowd turned their attention to the anomaly, their gazes turned into extreme shock. Far away on the horizon in front of them, a boundless wave of white that seemed to connect to the horizon. It came crashing down, blanketing the sky and the earth. The wave came very quickly. In just a quarter of an hour, it was already hundreds of feet away from the crowd. The Emperor of Zio's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. He moaned in despair and murmured, That's the lunar river's water. Everyone's faces were drained of all color when they saw the sudden change. Everyone realized what was sweeping towards them. It was the lunar river's water. Supreme Cloud had returned to direct the flow of the lunar river to this place? Among the 9 Supremes, Supreme Water had the ability to manipulate water, but now, it seemed that Supreme Cloud's ability to manipulate water had been further enhanced. What did it mean to direct the lunar river's water to Zilong City and change the course of the entire lunar river? To put it simply, it was not a problem for the lunar river's water to turn the entire empire of Zio's Zilong City into a swamp. Thousands of miles of land would become another ocean in the Tianshan continent in a very short amount of time. At this moment, everyone could not help but feel a surge of heartfelt regret. This Supreme Cloud was a lunatic, a complete lunatic. A madman who did not care about reputation, morality, or the safety of the common people. He wanted to drown the empire of Zio for such a trivial matter. Hundreds of millions of lives? Do you still have any humanity left? Why did we provoke such a madman previously? Before this madman's insanity was only limited to the battlefield. He would only intervene when we attacked his country. Now, however, this series of actions, kidnapping his family, setting traps, and other despicable tactics, had caused Supreme Cloud to explode completely. He no longer cared about worldly ethics, no longer cared about the common people, and no longer cared about the lives that would be lost. To achieve his goal he would go to extreme lengths. As long as the lunar river's water flowed into the empire of Zio, it would truly be the end of the world. At the very least, among the hundreds of millions of people within the empire of Zio's 10,000 miles of territory, other than a limited number of ace cultivators who could escape, the rest would not be spared. As for the empire of Zio, it would vanish from Tianshan continent's map in an extremely short amount of time, be it today or tomorrow. The emperor of Zio's lips trembled violently, unable to contain his emotions. He watched as the billowing white waves drew closer and closer until they were almost right in front of him, but he did not move. No matter how hard the guards and officials tried to pull and persuade him, the emperor just stood there blankly, watching the lunar river approach him in despair. As the emperor, if he did not leave, the other officials could not abandon the emperor and run for their lives. At this time, those who were the first to retreat would be convicted of treason, and there would be no room for redemption. The officials could only accompany the emperor of Zio as they watched the tide surging over from afar. Their faces were pale, their souls leaving their bodies as their legs trembled. However, after a while, the crowd was pleasantly surprised to find that the sudden tide before them was very strange. The tide was ferocious, but when it was 100 feet away from the crowd, it stopped abruptly and did not come any closer. The tide was rising higher and higher, and the flow of the water increased as well, but it only continued to pile up in front of it, not moving a single step forward. Zio's emperor and officials were witnessing the wonder of this lifetime at the same time. 100 feet away the white waves surged into the sky. The surging waves had already reached a height of several tens of feet. It was like the Milky Way had been turned upside down. Within 100 feet the ground beneath their feet was dry. There was not even a drop of water. This extreme contrast made everyone feel as if they were dreaming. Those who were observant immediately connected the dots and came to a realization. The current anomaly had to be man-made, and the culprit could only be one person, the brainchild of the Nine Supremes, Supreme Cloud. The current situation could be a show of force, a threat, or a terrifying toying with the Emperor of Zio. The Empire of Zio's demise and the lives of countless Zio citizens were all within a single thought of that person. It was truly a matter of life and death with a single thought. As the waves in front of them grew higher and higher, the fear in everyone's hearts grew stronger and stronger. Just when everyone was at a complete loss, the waves in front of them suddenly surged in an even more violent manner. And on the cusp of the storm, within the shining white waves of water, something suddenly rapidly took shape. In the blink of an eye, a silhouette stood on top of the waves, floating like an immortal. The crowd could clearly see that the silhouette was formed by the gathering of water, but the silhouette's eyes, mouth, and nose were obviously Lord Supreme Cloud, who had just left Zilong City. "I'm sorry. In order to prepare a surprise for all of you, I couldn't come at the appointed time. I'm late. This is all because I thought too highly of myself. I hope that your Majesty of Zio will forgive me." Lord Supreme Cloud stood on top of the waves as steady as a mountain. Although his words seemed to be an apology, everyone could hear the chilliness in his tone. How was that an apology? It was a demonstration of arrogance and condescension, looking down on ants. Who else in this world could draw the lunar river's water here? Who else could it be? Therefore, it was not that he thought highly of himself, but that he was demonstrating a fact. That Supreme Cloud had the ability to destroy Zio with a flip of his palm. The Emperor of Zio took a deep breath. Ignoring the civil and military officials and guards who tried to stop him, he took 3 steps forward alone and said with his head raised, "Lord Supreme Cloud lives up to his reputation indeed. Such a technique is truly a creation of heaven and earth, never before seen in this world since the beginning of time. I'm utterly impressed. No, I should say that I'm utterly impressed." A glimmer of surprise flashed across Yun Yang's eyes as he said faintly, "The Emperor of Zio is actually here. I didn't expect to see you again. Although this reputed one had said earlier that I hoped to have someone to talk to, I didn't expect your Majesty to come personally. You have given me face indeed. Thank you, your Majesty." The Emperor of Zio chuckled humorlessly. Supreme Cloud's prestige is unparalleled in the mystical heaven, unique in the universe. Since Supreme Cloud is here and has spoken up to invite me, of course I have to come personally and meet with Lord Supreme Cloud. I didn't know that it was Supreme Cloud who had come earlier, it was my fault. Yun Yang nodded and said, "Your Majesty's magnanimity is truly admirable. You are indeed the ruler of the world, the ruler of Zio." The Emperor of Zio smiled. "Lord Supreme Cloud, you flatter me," Yun Yang said leisurely, since ancient times, heroes have been born in troubled times. This saying has never changed even after millions of years. However, there's another saying that may not have been recorded in history, but to me it makes sense as well. That is, a wise ruler is born in troubled times. Yun Yang's voice was laced with the vicissitudes of life. Only when the heroes rise together can heroes be seen, and there must be a wise ruler to restrain and lead these heroes. Only then can they achieve the great cause of the ages and achieve the unparalleled ambition. Regardless of who wins or loses in this world hegemony war, the world hegemony war in this chaotic world must be fought between the wise and wise monarchs. Only then would they be able to create a legendary war that will be passed down through the ages. Only such a war is qualified to leave a mark in the history books. Yun Yang said sincerely, "Your Majesty is such a great ruler. As a ruler, His Majesty's actions are worthy of being called a wise ruler." The Emperor of Zhou smiled faintly and said, "How do I compare to Yutong's Yu-Peiza?" He was at an extreme disadvantage under the towering tide, but he was still talking and laughing. Even his expression and gaze did not change. He was not at a disadvantage at all. His arms were behind his back, his gaze was disdainful. He still had the demeanor of a ruler. A glimmer of admiration flashed in Yun Yang's eyes as he said, "Compared to Yutong's emperor, I have no comment on who is superior. There is only one point. Perhaps your Majesty's lofty ambitions and grand aspirations are not any weaker than our king's, but your control over your own country is clearly inferior." The Emperor of Zhou sighed softly and said with a smile, "Is it only the control over the country's forces? Is that all?" Yun Yang thought about it seriously and said, "That's really all. After all, His Majesty's and my Emperor's methods are different in terms of controlling the hearts of the people. His Majesty's method is to stabilize the hearts of the people with the balance of benefits, while my Emperor's method is to befriend them through friendship. At least this is a clear distinction. Of course, both methods have their advantages and disadvantages. It's hard to say which is superior." The Emperor of Zhou said, "I'd like to hear the details." Yun Yang said, "Using political tactics, using the Emperor's mind to control his subordinates, showing the king's grace, this is how a king conducts himself. There's nothing wrong with it, and the benefits of doing so are obvious as well. The officials will naturally tremble in fear when they face such a king, not daring to be negligent in anything. The smooth flow of government affairs can be said to be the best method. However, the shortcoming of this method lies in the lack of camaraderie. This will undoubtedly cause such maintenance to crumble at the first blow." The Emperor of Zhou pressed on with interest. "For example?" "Simply put, it's difficult to make people serve you wholeheartedly. I believe the Emperor of Zhou has experienced this drawback before." Yun Yang did not wait for the Emperor of Zhou to speak further and continued, "As for my Emperor, he treats people with sincerity. He treats his officials, especially the older ones, like his own brothers. Although there are suspicions and grudges, they're never too strong. He's always more lenient towards his family and friends. Of course, my Emperor's personality has also resulted in the Empire of Yutong having the most spies from other countries. This is an undeniable drawback of mine. It's difficult to keep any movement within Yutong's borders a secret. However, it's also easier to gain the loyalty of the officials and warriors. Otherwise, how could the Empire of Yutong have stood strong despite all these years of turmoil? The Emperor and his officials are of one mind, the generals and warriors serve with their lives. This ambition is unwavering. If Yutong hadn't fallen, Yutong would never have fallen. Countless families have voluntarily joined the war to defend the country. Even when they've fought until their heirs are all gone, they've continued to fight without regret." The Emperor of Zhou thought about it and nodded solemnly, saying, "I seem to understand, but there's still something I don't quite understand. It's not that your Majesty doesn't understand, but you want to use my mouth to say something to your officials, don't you?" Yun Yang smiled. The Emperor of Zhou laughed and said, "Lord Supreme Cloud, please teach the officials a lesson on my behalf today." Yun Yang thought about it and said, "Then let me give you the simplest and most direct example, a situation that would never happen in other countries. If Yutong were to fall one day and be conquered by the four empires, what you would get in the end would only be the destruction of Yutong. It would be impossible for you to conquer the hearts of Yutong's emperor and people, other than Yutong's millions of warriors who would fight to their deaths. Among the civil and military officials of Yutong's imperial court, those who would kneel and surrender when the country falls are at most 10 to 20%, and this includes the spies planted by the other countries. I dare even say that the other countries would never be in such a state." The Emperor of Zhou said, "What if Zhou falls? What does Lord Supreme Cloud think?" Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, "The one who asks the question should be the one who knows the answer best. If Zio falls, those who are willing to fight to their last breath will, at most, take up 10 to 20% of Zio's imperial officials. This is the most optimistic view, and I've said as much as I can." The Zio officials who were present glared at Yun Yang, but none of them dared to refute him. The Emperor of Zio guffawed when he heard the words, tears rolling down his cheeks as he clapped his hands and said, "That makes sense. That makes sense. Ah." Both were 10 to 20%. On one side were those who surrendered. Those who kneeled and served the enemy were 10 to 20%, including the spies in the other countries. On the other side, those who fought to their deaths were, at most, 10 to 20%, and this was the most optimistic assessment. These two 10 to 20% were both 10 to 20%, but the difference between them was like heaven and earth. They were two extremes that could not be mentioned in the same breath. Zio's emperor was still guffawing in front of him. He was laughing heartily, tears trickling down his cheeks along with his laughter. However, no one saw the tears in his laughter because his back was facing the civil and military officials. Behind him, many of the Empire of Zio's civil and military officials wore expressions of unconcealable humiliation. Some were deep in thought with a frown, while others were sneering in disdain. Other than that, there were also some who were unmoved, not taking Yun Yang's words seriously at all. Everyone had their own encounters, choices, and standpoints in life. No one's choice was necessarily correct. It was just that it varied from person to person. These are the two paths of a ruler. It's hard to say which one is better or worse. Yun Yang said honestly, everything can only be judged by the final outcome. The winner becomes king, the loser becomes a thief. The winner becomes king, the loser becomes a thief. After talking to you today, I have no regrets in this life. The Emperor of Zio said seriously, however, I can say this here, as long as I'm on the throne, Zio will not fall. He spoke these words resolutely and decisively, and it was filled with an indisputable feeling. His words jolted the countless Zio officials behind him into a jolt of vigor. For a moment, all of Zio's officials felt their spines straighten again. Even with the threat of the nation's destruction before them, they were no longer as fearful. Yun Yang said faintly, perhaps. He did not say that the Empire of Zio would fall as long as he released his control over the flood today. It would be useless no matter what oath you swore. At most, you would be drowned in the flood first. That would fulfill your oath. Zio would only fall after your death. The Emperor of Zio sucked in a deep breath, suppressing all the emotions that had just surged within him. He said with a smile, Lord Supreme Cloud has said before that he wants someone who is qualified to speak to him. I wonder if I'm qualified to speak to you? Yun Yang could not help but chuckle. If even His Majesty can't do it, then no one else in the Empire of Zio is qualified. The Emperor of Zio said in relief, that's good. Let me speak to Lord Supreme Cloud. Lord Supreme Cloud also said that we should know what you want. Yun Yang replied, that's right. Since your Majesty is here and has seen everything before you, your Majesty will naturally know what I want. The Emperor of Zio smiled faintly and waved his hand, saying, bring the yellow bear that died in Zilong City here in one piece. Once Yun Yang heard the word died in battle, he shut his eyes abruptly. Died in battle? Before this, Yun Yang still held on to the slightest hope. Even if Blackie was on the brink of death, even if he was forcefully suppressed and subdued by Zio's experts, even if his mystical beast foundation was destroyed and he was reduced to the most common black bear, it would be fine as long as he was still alive. However, the answer that he was most unwilling to face, the cruelest reality, had finally been laid bare before his eyes. That naive little bear, that sturdy little bear that followed him step by step, had died in battle? The little bear that had followed him for a few days and had yet to enjoy the benefits of being his follower had died in battle? On his wrist, a small green snake that had recovered its health suddenly lowered its head and hid in its coiled body. 2 drops of tears condensed from spiritual chi soaked Yun Yang's wrist. Yun Yang could clearly feel the little snake's body trembling slightly. The crowd far away parted to the left and right. Hundreds of people were carrying a huge body over with thick wooden sticks. It was the little bear. The little bear's body was no longer whole. Not only had its chest and abdomen been sliced open, its limbs had also been chopped off and placed on its body. Its head was littered with sword wounds and many of them were still oozing blood and brain matter. There was no longer any breath left in it. It was an unusually thorough death, even worse than old Dugu. The team carried the little bear over slowly and brought it to the front of the flood. Yun Yang lowered his head slowly, looking down at the little bear's carcass. His expression was blank, but his eyes were burning with rage. The small snake that was coiled around his wrist shot out with a swoosh. In the blink of an eye, the small snake turned into a moir python that was as thick as an arm and pounced on the little bear. The moir python trembled and hissed as it slithered around the little bear, calling out anxiously. Even the moir python's cry had a faint whine to it. It sounded like the cries of a little bear. Obviously, the moir python hoped to awaken the yellow bear that was no longer breathing. Yunyang slowly closed his eyes and opened them again. A ball of water slowly flowed up the little bear's body, washing every part of it clean. The countless wounds on the carcass were slowly healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was a miracle created by the combination of Yunyang's holy water charm, endless divine art, and Emmy's air of vitality. Of course, more importantly, the yellow bear had just died not long ago. As the king of mystical beasts, its physical body was still full of vitality. That was how the wounds had healed. After a while, even the little bear's limbs had been untied back to their original positions. It looked very clean, as if it had just fallen asleep. Yunyang took another deep breath and enveloped the little bear's body with his deific consciousness. On one hand, it was to check if there were any wounds that had yet to be healed. On the other hand, he was still holding on to the slightest bit of hope. However, just as his deific consciousness reached the body, Yunyang was enraged as he hollered, "Where is the little bear's mystical core?" His deific consciousness swept over the little bear. The mystical core that should have been in the little bear's head had disappeared without a trace. Yunyang was instantly enraged. His murderous intent filled the air as he stared coldly at the Emperor of Zio and said coldly, "Emperor of Zio, where is my little bear's mystical core? I hope that you can send it to me immediately. This is my pet and also my warrior. I hope that my warriors will be able to be buried in one piece and rest in peace. The same goes for the body and the same goes for the inner core. Send it to me." Chapter 442. Had the mystical core gone missing? The Emperor of Zio had not thought of this. The mystical core of a 9th-level mystical beast was an extremely rare treasure to most of the practitioners in this world. There was no doubt about it, and it could not be questioned. However, the Emperor of Zio would never have thought that there would be someone who would be bold enough to hide the mystical core in the face of the threat of the nation's demise. This fact made him feel as if his face was burning hot. At this moment, the rage in his heart was no less than Yunyang's. In fact, it was even more intense. Could it be that the survival of a nation and the lives of hundreds of millions of people were not as important as a mystical core in some people's eyes? What kind of a heart was this? Where is the mystical core? The Emperor of Zio turned around, his cold gaze sweeping across a certain person. Then, his chilling gaze locked onto the person. Yunyang followed his gaze and saw that the person was dressed in green, wielding a long sword. His face was simple and unsophisticated. It was the swordsman who had chased after him with his sword in the air. It was also because of this swordsman's ambush that Yunyang was stopped at the last moment of his attempt to break out of the siege. Whitey III was first gravely injured, then Yunyang was wounded, causing the situation to take a turn for the worse. Otherwise, the little bear would not have perished in this battle. This swordsman was undoubtedly very powerful. However, facing Supreme Cloud now, he felt uncomfortable all over. Yunyang glared at this person coldly, feeling the murderous intent within him difficult to suppress. "Your Majesty, you are too kind." The swordsman was courteous in the face of the Emperor of Zio's inquiry, bowing with his sword cupped. "Did you take the yellow bear's mystical core?" The Emperor of Zio went straight to the point. The swordsman's expression changed slightly, but he still answered calmly, "That's right. According to the martial world's rules, such a treasure belongs to whoever killed the mystical core's original owner. There's nothing wrong with that, it has always been so." The Emperor of Zio sucked in a deep breath and said, "Now that the Empire of Zio is on the brink of life and death, what the other party wants is this mystical core." The Emperor of Zio's eyes were burning with uncontrollable rage as well. At a time like this, when the land was about to turn into a swamp, "You're talking to me about martial world rules? What kind of rules were these?" The swordsman replied readily, "As long as Lord Supreme Cloud has no other requests, this lowly one is more than happy to hand over the mystical core with both hands to end this calamity." The Emperor of Zio frowned slightly and repeated instinctively, "Other requests." The swordsman's voice deepened as he said, "After all, I was the one who killed the yellow bear. Supreme Cloud will certainly seek revenge. Even ants seek to live." Suddenly the Emperor of Zio understood it all. This fellow was obviously afraid. He was afraid that Supreme Cloud would ask for the Shen core along with the murderer. If that really happened, he would definitely die. The Emperor of Zio was both annoyed and amused by this little trick. Can a dignified saint of the sword not be so careful? This was a matter of life and death for the entire Empire of Zio. How could it be worsened by your personal choice? Yun Yang looked at the swordsman coldly and said faintly, "Say no more. Tell me your name. Today I can promise not to take your life." The little bear is a mystical beast, but since it accompanied me to kill in Zilong City, it's my comrade. It's understandable for a warrior to die on the battlefield, but I want its funeral to be perfect, without a single flaw. As for this grudge, we'll settle it in the future. Yun Yang's voice was cold. At this moment, Yun Yang wanted to kill this person before him even in his dreams. Besides, Yun Yang was confident that as long as he persisted and threatened the Empire of Zio, making his stand clear that he would only relent after this person's life was the price, the Emperor of Zio would have no choice but to accept it. No matter how reluctant he would still give the order to kill in exchange for Zio's safety. However, Yun Yang thought that doing so, the result of this revenge, was another insult to the little bear's sacrifice, a great insult. I want revenge. I want to kill you with my own hands. This was the real revenge for the little bear. Although he could also achieve the goal of revenge by borrowing others' hands and threats, Yun Yang did not want to do so. On top of that, Yun Yang could understand the swordsman's standpoint and choice. As a citizen of Zio, it was understandable for the swordsman to fight for his motherland's vengeance against his country. Now that he had established a great enmity and was being targeted by the enemy, not only was it a wise saying, it was also his heartfelt sentiment. It was just that his standpoint was different and nothing else, but to use his motherland as a threat to force him to sacrifice his life was truly despicable. Therefore, Yun Yang would rather seek revenge in the future than insist on killing this person. The swordsman lifted his head and looked at Yun Yang with a complicated gaze. He said softly, "This reputed one is known as Emerald Cloud Sword Saint. I will never change my name or my surname. I am LV Lingyun." LV Lingyun. The corners of Yun Yang's lips curled into a profound smile as he said faintly, "What a Emerald Cloud Sword Saint. I'll remember you." The few short words caused LV Lingyun's pupils to constrict. Even his heart skipped a beat nervously as a chill ran down his spine. He had intended to say a few more tough words to keep up appearances, but when he met the other party's cold gaze, he could not utter a single word. He had a sudden realization that what he was about to face was the Nine Supreme's vengeance. Supreme Cloud, who had been in an incomplete state and unable to use his manifestation, had already turned Zilong City upside down. If the great spiritual restraining formation was removed, it would be a piece of cake for him to exact his revenge with a myriad of tricks up his sleeves. Even now, even if the spiritual restraining formation was still there, could it fight against the Lunar River's water? Hand over the mystical core. Yun Yang ordered coldly. LV Lingyun sucked in a deep breath and said, "Lord Supreme Cloud, the battle on the battlefield is up to fate. Both parties are hostile to each other and have different standpoints. No matter how you fight, it's only right. If Lord Supreme Cloud wishes to take back your subordinate's item, you need to be more courteous in your words." Yun Yang smiled mockingly. "You said it yourself. We're hostile to each other and have different standpoints. Why should I be courteous to you? I repeat, hand over the mystical core. Otherwise, the Empire of Zio shall become history today." Qin Shi's extremely forceful tone caused the Sword Saint's face to flush red, and his eyes revealed extreme humiliation. "Hand it over to me personally right now?" Yun Yang scoffed coldly, his gaze gleaming with the cold glint before a massacre. His voice grew even colder. Everyone realized that Supreme Cloud was humiliating LV Lingyun on purpose. Most importantly, the other party's attitude showed that he did not care whether Yun Yang would hand over the mystical core or not. This was just an excuse. "Are you not going to hand over the mystical core? That's great. I shall drown Zio today and the Empire of Zio shall cease to exist in this world. Let's see if you, LV Lingyun, will choose to submit in humiliation or refuse forcefully. Will you submit in humiliation to your duty as a human being, or will you become Zio's sinner?" The sense of danger, the coercion from a higher position, and the blatant bullying, everyone could feel it clearly. LV Lingyun was trembling, his heart about to explode. How could he tolerate such extreme humiliation? Even if he was not a cultivator or a pinnacle expert, he was only an ordinary person. In the face of such humiliation, the only thing he could do was to fight with his life on the line. However, LV Lingyun could clearly feel the gazes on him from the people around him like sharp arrows. Every gaze was urging him to hand over the Niello Bear's core quickly and avert the current crisis. If it were not for the fact that his cultivation base was lacking, someone would have already made a move to snatch it away. LV Lingyun's heart was filled with indescribable regret. Why did he have to participate in this battle to annihilate Supreme Cloud? If he had been a coward like the others, there would be nothing left for him to do now. JavaScript, alternatively, he could have made a move earlier or taken down Supreme Cloud. Even if he did not win, dying in Supreme Cloud's hands would have been a clean slate. Not only would he have to endure this humiliation, he would also have to provoke a powerful enemy that he could not rival. From now on, he would have to live in fear and trepidation every single day and night. LV Lingyun's intestines were swollen with regret. Chapter 443. LV Lingyun was berating himself madly in his heart. LV Lingyun, oh LV Lingyun, why are you showing off? Only your cultivation base is high? Only you are capable? Only you have the heart to protect Zio? How are your countrymen treating you right now? His entire body was trembling, the thought of fighting Yunyang with his life on the line. However, he was a man who cherished his life. Otherwise, he would not have said that even an ant could live without purpose, and would not have generously offered the mystical bear core as a bargaining chip to save his life. How could he have known that the bargaining chip that he had expected to save his life had become a hot potato that he could not advance or retreat with? It was wrong whether he gave it or not. Just as LV Lingyun's emotions were in a mess and he was hesitating, he suddenly heard the sound of water splashing on the opposite side. Something strange had happened again. The group was still in a state of shock, but what they could see now was the surging waves surging from afar once again. The waves in front of them had already piled up to thousands of feet high, and they were growing taller and taller, almost to the point where the top could not be seen. If such a massive wave were to break through the seal, it would be unstoppable. No expert could stop it. I can tell you clearly that there is a limit to one's strength. My control of the lunar river has reached its limit, and I might lose control at any time. Yunyang said coldly, if I don't get the mystical core before I lose control, I won't be able to control the water even if you give it to me later. When the time comes, this heinous sin? Yunyang looked at LV Lingyun coldly. Both of us will bear it together. Since we're enemies on both sides, I don't mind having a few more Zio souls under my name. A Zio official's aged facial muscles twitched as he shouted, almost roaring, LV Lingyun. What are you waiting for? LV Lingyun's body trembled again. She clenched her teeth and looked around. Her face was ashen. Suddenly, all her hopes turned to dust. Her whole body relaxed as if she had lost all her strength. He took a slow step forward and raised his hand. In his palm was a mystical core. LV Lingyun seemed to have aged a few decades in an instant. He walked forward step by step. Along the way he did not raise his head at all. Every step he took seemed to be 1,000 caddies heavy. Every step was extremely difficult. The Emperor of Zio sighed in relief silently as he watched him walk out. However, the expression on his face was extremely complicated and humiliated. As the monarch of a country, he was threatened right in front of the country's gates. He could only watch helplessly as his people walked out of the country in extreme humiliation, yet he could do nothing about it. Furthermore, he was one of the people who pushed for this extreme humiliation. This feeling almost drove him crazy. However, at the bottom of his heart, in a hidden place, there was a kind of joy flowing. Aren't you cowards? Weren't you guys unwilling to do anything? Aren't you all selfish? But, in the face of the threat of a nation's destruction, who could be spared? I hope that from now on all of you can understand one sentence. When the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain intact? From now on they could work together to build Zio's unbreakable shield. Yunyang watched coldly as LV Lingyun walked over step by step until he was right in front of him. He did not lift his head, only raising his hands to present the mystical core. Yunyang snorted coldly and extended his hand to retrieve the mystical core. Then, he brushed past LV Lingyun amidst the gushing water, as if he did not even have eyes for LV Lingyun. He walked to the side of the little bear's carcass and wrapped the mystical core in a ball of life force before solemnly placing it back into the little bear's skull. Looking at the huge body in front of him, Yunyang's heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. Little bear. I will avenge you. I will kill LV Lingyun to avenge you. Once the vow was made, Yunyang waved his hand and the little bear's huge body disappeared. Soon after, he slowly stood up, turned around and walked back. He didn't say anything unnecessary. When he had walked 100 feet and returned to the front of the flood, Yunyang's back was still facing Zio's emperor and officials, as well as LV Lingyun, who was still standing blankly like a statue. He spoke in a low but clear voice, when two countries are at war they are enemies. On the battlefield and in the imperial court, it is only right that one does not resort to any means. Even kidnapping the family of an important person to threaten is a despicable act, but it is also a means of coping under certain circumstances. This is still a personal choice. However, all of this has nothing to do with me. I believe that no one in this world can forget the legend of the Nine Supremes. We, the Nine Supremes, may not be your opponents when it comes to scheming, but when it comes to kidnapping someone, I think no one is better than us at it. No one should object to this. After today's battle, it has already been proven that the Empire of Zio has no bottom line. Since you, as our enemies, have no bottom line, then we don't have to abide by the so-called bottom line anymore. From now on, we shall rely on our own means and leave our fates to fate. Today's debt, I will settle it with all of you. The reason why Zio has not been flooded today is because I don't care to do things that involve the loss of life. On the battlefield, however, there is no such thing as civilians. As a general or a soldier, there is no thought of returning to the battlefield after dying on the battlefield. LV Lingyun, start planning your escape now. Let's see if I can exterminate your entire family one by one. Supreme Cloud's tone had not been harsh, he had only spoken in an indifferent tone, as if he was talking to himself. However, when these words fell into the ears of the Empire of Zio's emperor and officials, they were like thunderbolts that pierced straight into their hearts, like a nightmare curse that could never be erased. Everyone knew that Yutong's Lord Supreme Cloud was truly enraged this time. The calmer he spoke, the more it showed that he had already made up his mind. There was no turning back. In the next moment, Supreme Cloud's silhouette rose into the air, melding into the water that filled the sky without any hesitation. There was not even the slightest movement. The torrential tide receded abruptly, even faster than the ebbing tide of the ocean. With a splash, the tide had already retreated thousands of feet away. After a few breaths, the boundless flood that could drown half of the Empire of Zio's territory had vanished without a trace. At least, it was no longer within sight. If it were not for the continuous crashing of the waves from afar, everyone would have suspected that it was an illusion. After a while, the torrential tide could no longer be heard, as if it was far away in the horizon. The Emperor of Zio stared into the distance, silent and stunned for a moment. LV Lingyun stood there, exhausted as if he had lost his soul. Based on his identity, cultivation base and accomplishment, he should not have felt this way. However, Yun Yang, the Emperor of Zio, and many others on Zio's side had exerted too much pressure on him. He had truly reached his limit. If he had been a little more forceful, this person would have broken down on the spot. It would not have been a mental breakdown, but he would have exploded to his limit, a frenzied massacre that did not distinguish between friend and foe. The Emperor of Zio's side drifted over. Yutong's Supreme Cloud has come thousands of miles for his friends and family. Facing the entire Empire of Zio, he has fought with all his might for his friends and family. Now that he has returned and threatened with the torrential tide, he has done so for his comrades who have fought alongside him. Even when he threatened to annihilate the nation, he didn't do such an extreme thing in the end, causing the people to suffer and suffering. Yutong's Supreme Cloud is a true hero. Even when he is filled with hatred, he still has the heart of a benevolent man, unwilling to harm the innocent. I believe that even if we didn't give him the mystical core in the end, he wouldn't really flood Zio and harm the people. The Emperor of Zio's voice drifted over desolately. The gap between us and Yutong is too great. If we were to attack Yutong now, the consequences would be unimaginable. If Yutong's people were to be plunged into misery, would we still have the right to accuse Supreme Cloud of destroying Zio with the flood? He paused and continued, "Pass on my decree, the army is to retreat and return to Zio to recuperate. We shall fight Yutong again when our army is strong." "Your Majesty, you mustn't." Countless officials came forward to plead and stop him. They did not want the four empires to besiege Yutong to be broken just like that. However, the Emperor of Zio had already made up his mind. "I've made up my mind. There's no need to say anything more." There was only a cold glint flickering in his eyes now. It was not necessarily a bad thing to not send out the army. How could the Empire of Zio not have internal strife now? Many people in the royal family have conspired and colluded to usurp the throne and overthrow the current dynasty. This has been going on for a long time, but I have never hardened my heart to punish them. I've always thought of resisting the external forces first before pacifying the internal forces, causing the situation to deteriorate day by day. Furthermore, the military power outside has given them a considerable amount of control as well. Gradually, it has evolved into a terrifying balance that keeps each other in check. In spite of this, the empire of Zio is now in a state of devastation, swaying in the wind and rain. Even I, the emperor, can be ousted at any time. How can I talk about uniting the world? I might as well use this excuse to withdraw the army and reclaim all the military power. I can use this opportunity to reorganize the country. Resisting the external forces should wait until after pacifying the internal forces. Supreme Cloud had already retreated, but his arrival and departure had left Zio with an endless amount of authority and a lingering charm. On the way back to the city, everyone had a pensive look on their faces, and their hearts were heavy with worries. Lan Wuxin followed His Majesty back, but he was in a trance along the way. Prime Minister Lan, who had always been meticulous and far-sighted, did not know what he was thinking. There was only one feeling that made him feel strange. Prime Minister Lan's hatred towards the culprit who had caused him so much harm did not seem to be as great as he had imagined. For his family, he had traveled tens of thousands of miles to rescue them, disregarding life and death. Fighting Zio alone, he had no regrets. For his comrade in arms, he had drowned Zio. Even if he had to die, he had to make sure his funeral was complete, no matter the cost. Even though he had used and deceived Lan Wuxin throughout the process, it only served to show how brilliant the other party was. Just like what Supreme Cloud had said, if all of you could do something without a bottom line, who would I lie to if not you? Moreover, a person who claimed to be wise had been deceived by another person. He really didn't have any confidence to say anything. Sigh. Lan Wuxin sighed at the sky, unable to help the indescribable loneliness in his heart. All his messy thoughts turned into a sigh. In the dense forest, the moir python's massive body had long been retracted, shrinking into an ordinary python that was only a few dozen feet long. It looked at the thing in front of it with surprise and delight. It was a baby bear. A tiny newborn baby bear. Chapter 444. A little bear cub that looked like it had just been born, probably not even a month old yet. It had a confused look on its face. Its every movement was clumsy and it didn't know what to do. However, as the moir python watched, tears began to fall from its eyes again. The moir python looked at the little fellow like it had found a treasure. As the cub stumbled back and forth, the moir python was like the most competent babysitter. It watched the cub intently, not even willing to blink. Occasionally, when it saw the cub fall, it would quickly help it up. When it saw the cub run to a dangerous place, it would immediately release the domineering aura of a top-notch mystical beast, ensuring that no mystical beast would come close and cause harm. This kind of conscientiousness and cautiousness was something that even one's own father and mother would not be able to do. Yun Yang watched from the side, his heart filled with an indescribable sigh. He did not know if it was because the heavens were too kind to Yun Yang and did not want him to face the regret of losing his family and comrades again, or if it was because of Yun Yang's desire for perfection that he had created a miracle. Although it was not perfect, it was still somewhat comforting. Previously, after Yun Yang had kept the cub's physical body, he had forcefully demanded the mystical core and returned the mystical core to the yellow bear. All of these were Yun Yang's hopes that the cub could finally rest in peace in a complete state. However, when Yun Yang had returned the mystical core, he had also sent a stream of pure spiritual energy of vitality. The original intention of this spiritual energy was to merge the mystical core and the yellow bear's damaged head into one again, to achieve the greatest level of perfection. However, the original owner of this spiritual energy was not Yun Yang but Emmy. Emmy, a creature that would pluck its feathers from a swallow, naturally coveted Blackie's mystical core. Although it dared not take it for itself due to Yun Yang, it would still be good to touch it. Therefore, within the spiritual energy of vitality, there was a hint of Emmy's thoughts. Of course, it was only to touch it to satisfy its craving. It would never dare to absorb the yellow bear's last remnant. However, it was this little bit of coincidence that led to a great turning point in the future. The yellow bear was a surpassing mystical beast and a king among the mystical beasts. Needless to say, its ability was strong and it had climbed to the peak of its bottleneck for many years. Normally, it would not be able to advance further unless it had gone through many life and death experiences. However, in the mystical beast forest, only the moir python could arm wrestle with Blackie. Both of these beasts cherished their lives and would never fight to the death. This had caused the two beasts to stagnate for many years. It was also because of this condition that the two beasts submitted to Yun Yang without much trouble. During the battle that day, the yellow bear had been injured many times. Many times he had recovered due to the chi of vitality. Although he was physically and mentally injured, it had also caused the bottleneck of his ability to waver and crack. When he had tossed the moor python, the yellow bear had disregarded life and death and the price he had to pay. All he wanted was to protect his comrade and escape from danger. The surge of his ability had exceeded his usual limit. Otherwise, how could he have fought with Emerald Cloud Sword Saint Lv Lingyun, whose ability was above Yin Yang's? However, the yellow bear had broken through in the midst of battle after all. The increment of its ability was relatively limited, especially when it had lost the support of Yin Yang's spiritual energy of vitality. In the end, it could not hold on any longer and fell to the ground. It was dismembered and even its mystical core was dug out. How could there be a turning point in such a manner of death? However, the yellow bear was still in a state of breakthrough then. Most of its soul was concentrated on the mystical core. It could almost be said that the mystical core had gathered most of the yellow bear's soul. Although Emmy had failed to save old Dugu, it had still increased its sense of the soul. Naturally, it had sensed the abnormality of the mystical core at once. Even so, the yellow bear was still helpless. Even if the mystical core was fine and its soul was still present, its physical body had been dismembered and its injuries had reached a point where it could not be healed. The best Yun Yang could do was to collect the dissipated soul of the cub into the mystical core and place this mystical core on the newborn yellow bear cub. However, this was equivalent to possession. Once it was let go, it would completely collapse. Therefore, Yun Yang had used Emmy's unique ability to form a seal. Only when the yellow bear's ability returned to the state of a 7th-level mystical beast could it absorb the mystical core's energy and resume its journey to the pinnacle of the mystical beast king. According to Emmy, although the yellow bear had been reborn, it was not necessarily a blessing in disguise. Its current foundation had far exceeded its original state. As long as its cultivation base grew and it returned to its original level, it would merge with the mystical core that had broken through its original bottleneck. On the day of awakening, not only would it be able to recall its past, its ability would also break through to a terrifying level. The long process of growing to a 7th-level mystical beast was the process of the physical body and the soul being polished and merged again and again. It was precisely because of this completely unexpected yet extremely surprising turn of events that the moor python, such a ferocious beast king, was now guarding the little bear in front of it with infinite gentleness. The only reason was that Lao He was still here and his heart was clear. This little fellow had the aura of a little bear. The little bear would return one day. I'll wait for you. It looks like you don't want to leave with me? Yun Yang sighed and looked at the moor python. The moor python hissed twice, a reluctant look in its eyes. However, when it turned its head and saw the silly little bear, it immediately swung its tail and its gaze became determined. I want to stay here and watch him. I want to watch him climb to the pinnacle again. I want to wait for the day he awakens and realizes his past. If I leave, the current him will definitely be bullied by other mystical beasts. It's also possible for him to grow again. What if I bring him along with me? All of you stay by my side. Yun Yang asked tentatively. The moor python shook its head vigorously. For a mystical beast like the yellow bear, it had to be in the dense forest for its initial growth. Only by facing the wind, frost, snow, rain and all dangers could one become a king. Besides, this was the place where the little bear had started. Only here could the little bear return be more compatible, more natural and stronger. All right. Yun Yang was silent for a moment. Anyway, don't forget about me. If there comes a day, you can come and find me anytime. The moor python crawled over and wrapped itself around Yun Yang's calf gently, rubbing against it affectionately. Then it released its body reluctantly. Its pair of cold and cruel eyes looked at the little bear once again, filled with anticipation and gentleness. Yun Yang sighed and rubbed his hands together. A dozen balls of rich air of vitality floated out one after another and landed in front of the moor python. The moor python took a step back, a sincere desire flashing in its eyes. However, it did not eat them immediately like it usually did. Instead, it cupped the little fellow with its head and let it eat. Before this, as long as a ball of spiritual vitality was taken out, it would be enough for these two kings to fight it out. Now, the moor python could actually be so courteous. This courteous gesture made Yun Yang's eyes almost burn with tears. These are yours. Yun Yang said gently, there are more for him. Immediately, a dozen balls of spiritual vitality were thrown onto the little bear. The little bear whimpered happily and gobbled down the spiritual chi. Its furry face was filled with satisfaction. Only then did the moor python feel at ease and began to devour the spiritual chi that was given to it. When it arrived, it still left 2 balls and sent them to the little bear's nose for the little bear to eat. Yun Yang shook his head and smiled bitterly. Before he left, he secretly threw another 2 balls directly into the Moar python's mouth. With these spiritual chi, he believed that the Moar python and the little bear could break through the shackles of 9th-level mystical beasts and even break through the 10th level to become surpassing mystical beasts or even higher existences. He hoped that there would be a chance for them to meet again by then. Yun Yang stood quietly in front of the dense forest. In front of him was a stretch of official road. In the dense forest, there was still a hissing sound that was filled with reluctance to part. However, the hissing sound was getting further and further away, gradually drifting into the depths of the forest. I will definitely come back to see all of you. Definitely. Yun Yang sighed softly. Hopefully by then, you will have gotten to know each other again and be truly intimate. Suddenly Yun Yang soared into the air, turning into a gust of wind and a white cloud, heading towards the west leisurely. Watching the wind and the clouds in the sky, the hissing sound came from the dense forest again. A huge Moar python, its head hidden under the dense leaves, coiled around a towering tree. It raised its head to look at the white cloud in the sky through the shade, unwilling to leave for a long time. This is the best result I can come up with. Don't threaten me in the future. Life and death are always cruel. Everything should have rules. If the protagonist is too successful, all of you will scold him if one of his brothers does not die. Occasionally one of them dies, everyone will scold him even more fiercely. Chapter 445. On the other side, Shangguan Lingxiu had already led her men to sail back to the east. She had known that the journey would be fraught with danger and that life and death would be hanging by a thread. Now that she had managed to retreat unscathed without losing any of her men, she should have been overjoyed. However, there was only a faint trace of melancholy on Shangguan Lingxiu's beautiful and spirited face. Although she had managed to prevent any casualties this time, she had not accomplished anything. It could even be said that she had not done anything at all. This was completely different from their original intentions. They could not even be mentioned in the same breath. After a long and arduous journey to come here, she had only knelt before Ancestor Wudi's memorial tablet and kowtowed a few times. That was all. Although she had helped Supreme Cloud at the crucial moment later, Shangguan Lingxiu knew very well that what she had done was only the icing on the cake. In spite of this, Shangguan Lingxiu knew very well that her intervention would only be the icing on the cake. Even without her controlling the city gate, Supreme Cloud could break it open and escape on his own. He did not even need to pass through the city gate. He could have flown away directly from the sky. If that was the case, they would still be suspected of being Supreme Cloud's burden. Then what was the point of her coming here? She sat alone at the bow of the 3-story ship, hugging her knees, lost in thought and speechless for a long time. He wondered where Supreme Cloud was right now. Was he out of danger? What would be the outcome of the meeting with the Empire of Zio's higher-ups? Would the Empire of Zio's people vent their anger on Ancestor Wudi's ancestral hall because of this loss? Would they destroy the remains like what they had said earlier? Where would the Shangguan family of generals' future be? How far could they go in the future? What would the future hold for her nephews at home? Would their young shoulders be able to carry the Shangguan family of generals' banner? Now that the world was on the brink of chaos, the days of war were upon us. Would the Shangguan family of generals be able to stand tall in this chaotic world? Was she, Shangguan Lingxiu, the only adult of the current generation of the Shangguan family of generals, shouldering the banner of the Shangguan family of generals, yet she had done nothing? If there was no Shangguan family of generals in Yutong's battlefield amidst the chaos, how could the Shangguan family of generals still be called a family of generals? The soul of a soldier? Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but sigh softly after a long while. Unable to contain her thoughts, she could not help but sigh softly. The Shangguan family of generals? Regarding this matter, his subordinates had sent over a few pieces of intelligence, all of which had just been sent over via Messenger Eagle. Shangguan Lingxiu had only opened the first letter when her expression changed. For empires had attacked Yutong. Yutong was surrounded by the flames of war and was in a precarious situation. It was no longer a sign of chaos, but a war was imminent. The content of the second letter was that Supreme Cloud had fought in Zilong City and forced Zio's emperor to submit in front of the city. A torrential flood had suppressed Zilong City and boosted Yutong's morale. The third piece of information: Zio has retreated. The threat of the Empire of Yutong's west had been resolved. After reading the first 3 reports, Shangguan Lingxiu heaved a soft sigh of relief. The situation was not at its worst yet. At least, the war from Zio had stopped. Yutong had Supreme Cloud, so this war was not too pessimistic. However, the fourth piece of news that followed made Shangguan Lingxiu worried again. The empire of Dongxuan's Han Sanhe had led a 1,000,000-strong army to wage a bloody battle against Fu Baogua at the Fortress of Resilience. The eastern border was in a state of emergency. Other than that, Marshal Tai Zheng had also started a war with the enemy in the northern border. The war was in a stalemate. The southern border was about to engage in battle as well. The war was unavoidable. It was obvious that many of the messages had been sent on the same day. There was even a message sent in the morning that had a new change in the afternoon, prompting another message to be sent out. The situation was changing rapidly as the messages came flying like snowflakes. High up in the sky, there were still a few messenger birds flying around in search of their target's location. The chaos of the world is unavoidable. For the first time, Shangguan Lingxiu's usually spirited face was filled with genuine worry. My country that has been plagued by disasters. When will there be peace in the world? What are you sighing about? A gentle voice came from behind her. Shangguan Lingxiu stood up as if she had been electrocuted. Why did the voice sound so familiar? Who was it? Turning to look at the source of the voice, she could only see a cloud drifting in the sky. There was a vague silhouette in the cloud. The face seemed to be familiar, but she could not make out the other person's face no matter how hard she tried. The only thing she could feel was that this person was looking at her with a smile. Lord Supreme Wind? No, Lord Supreme Cloud? Shangguan Lingxiu corrected herself quickly. Until now, Shangguan Lingxiu still felt incredulous. Prior to this, Shangguan Lingxiu had always known that the surviving member of Yutong's 9 Supremes was Supreme Wind. Who would have thought that after a trip to the Empire of Zio, Supreme Wind would suddenly turn into Supreme Cloud, the brainchild of the 9 Supremes? And this special change had never been mentioned before in the country. Actually, Supreme Wind and Supreme Cloud are both part of the 9 Supremes. Lord Supreme Cloud said, I heard you sigh about the chaos in the world. What's the specific reason? Shangguan Lingxiu sighed faintly and said, it looks like Lord Supreme Cloud is focused on Zio and knows very little about the current situation. Actually, I've only just received the intelligence as well. These. Just as she was about to hand them over, she suddenly remembered that the 9 Supremes information network was much more timely than hers. There was a 99% chance that Lord Supreme Cloud had already known about what she was seeing. Even if he did not know about it before, he would have received the intelligence as soon as the incident in Zio had already happened. At least he should have known about it earlier than her. Thinking about it, she could not help but say, I believe Lord Supreme Cloud has long known about this. Yunyang replied, Lady, you're referring to the invasion of the 4 empires? He sighed faintly and said, I have indeed known about this a long time ago, but I don't have any better ideas right now. Invading the 4 empires, we, the people of Yutong, can only fight to our deaths. That's all. Shangguan Lingxiu perked up and said, yes, only fight to our deaths. Yunyang chuckled and said, the war is still ongoing. Indeed, we can only do our best and leave the rest to fate. However, I don't think you've achieved your goal in coming to Zio this time, have you? Shangguan Lingxiu heaved another deep sigh and said, loyalty and filial piety can't be fulfilled at the same time. Everything should be prioritized by the nation. Family matters should naturally give way to this. Shangguan Lingxiu is a woman, but she knows that no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Yunyang smiled and said, the Empire of Zio, in a sense, it has already been destroyed. Therefore, Senior Shangguan Wudi's wish all those years ago can be considered to have been fulfilled. Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes shone brightly. Therefore, when I left this time, I brought back all of Senior Wudi's remains. How can the remains of Yutong's famed general be left in another country? Supreme Cloud's voice was filled with reverence. The remains of a loyal official should be laid to rest. General Wudi's long-cherished wish has been fulfilled as well. I'm sure Senior Shangguan Wudi would be comforted to know this in the afterlife. Looking at the bundle of remains and the memorial tablets in Supreme Cloud's hands, Shangguan Lingxiu felt an inexplicable surge in her heart. She felt a lump in her throat and actually cried tears of joy. 3 skeletons. 3 memorial tablets. The memorial tablets of Ancestor Wudi, his wife and his son, the remains of a family of 3, had finally returned to the hands of the Shangguan family of generals. Holding them in her hands, Shangguan Lingxiu felt as if she was carrying 1,000 caddies of weight. Yunyang watched as the remains and memorial tablets landed in Shangguan Lingxiu's hands. Suddenly he felt an unusual ripple in his deific consciousness. When he focused his gaze, he was shocked. His spiritual sense could see a small whirlwind slowly appearing in front of the memorial tablet on top of the skeleton bag. It was slowly spinning up with a loud whistling sound. There was a clear sense of joy and relief coming from the small whirlwind, as if a long-cherished wish had suddenly been fulfilled. In a trance, Yunyang seemed to have seen a person clad in steel armor, holding a long spear, riding a black horse that was galloping across the land. Although it was only a man and a horse, Yunyang could clearly feel the domineering aura of invincibility on the battlefield, the domineering aura of being able to enter and exit an army of millions at will. With a spear in hand, I am invincible on the battlefield. The person galloped among the clouds and came before Yunyang. He held his long spear in a cupped fist salute, his hawk-like eyes looking at Yunyang's face with a sincere smile of gratitude. Yunyang's heart skipped a beat. A sense of loyalty and lofty aspiration to fight on the battlefield for the country and the people suddenly filled his heart. Without any reminder, he already knew who the person in front of him was. His face involuntarily turned solemn, revealing a sense of respect. He raised his hand and returned a proper military salute. The middle-aged man smiled. It was a carefree smile. Somehow, when he saw the smile, Yunyang felt his extremely repressed emotions lighten up. He could not help smiling as well in response. However, what Shangguan Lingxiu saw now was different from what Yunyang had seen. She felt her mind go blank for a moment, as if three people had suddenly appeared before her eyes. A middle-aged man with a tall and muscular build, his face square and stern, his eyes as sharp and spirited as a hawk's. Beside him was a petite girl with a gentle face. Both of them stood in front of her as if they were real, looking at her with smiles on their faces that were filled with intimacy. In front of them was a little boy who seemed to be only 3 or 4 years old, yet he seemed to be only 2 or 3 years old at the same time. His face was filled with innocence. Such a harmonious family of 3 had appeared in front of her, smiling at her. The comfort, the praise, and the feeling that blood was thicker than water allowed Shangguan Lingxiu to immediately know who the 3 people before her were. Ancestor Peerless? Shangguan Lingxiu blurted out. Chapter 446. In front of Shangguan Lingxiu, the middle-aged man smiled. It was a smile of relief that came from letting go of everything and finally having no more worries. As for the gentle lady beside him, she pointed at Shangguan Lingxiu and then at Lord Supreme Cloud, who was standing beside her. Then she held her husband's hand tightly in hers. Looking at Shangguan Lingxiu's smile, there was a strange meaning to it. It seemed to be a blessing, a reminder, and also, however, the middle-aged man shook his head and held his wife's hand tightly, as if his wife wanted to say something but was stopped by her husband. A helpless smile hung on the gentle lady's face. She glanced at Shangguan Lingxiu again, the corners of her lips curling into a smile. Then, the man and the lady turned at the same time and bowed solemnly in the direction of Tiantang in the east. Then they straightened up and turned back to look at Shangguan Lingxiu once more. The middle-aged man waved his hand. Then he took the hand of the lady beside him and carried the child. A horse suddenly appeared in the air and the 3 of them landed on its back at the same time. The horse carried the 3 of them and galloped through the clouds and fog. As it galloped, both the man and the horse suddenly turned into a gust of wind and disappeared. Although the memorial tablets in front of Yunyang and Shangguan Lingxiu did not budge, the 3 parcels that contained the bones suddenly deflated at the same time. The difference in the weight in her hands was obvious. Shangguan Lingxiu felt like she had just woken up from a dream and quickly opened the parcels to look at the contents. As expected, there was nothing left in the 3 skeletal bundles, only a pile of white ashes remained. That was Ancestor Wudi? Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes were misty with tears but she was smiling. The old man's wish has finally been fulfilled. He left in peace, bringing his beloved wife and son to the netherworld to accompany them. Yunyang heaved a long sigh of relief and said, "Today has been an eye-opener for me as well. It's true that the heroic spirit lives on forever." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled through her tears and said, "This is also my first time seeing Ancestor Wudi. He is indeed a senior of the Shangguan family of generals. Such grace and bearing have never been seen by any other general today." Yunyang said in a low voice, "Invincible is invincible." He had to admit that it was no wonder the empire of Ziyou had resorted to despicable means to destroy General Shangguan Wudi back then. His invincible aura was truly admirable. It was as if, even in the midst of a 1,000,000-strong army, as long as this person rode out, he would be an invincible existence. He was an invincible hero. This feeling had long been deeply engraved in the hearts of everyone on both sides. No one believed that they could defeat such an expert on the battlefield. Unparalleled divine general. Yunyang gave his own comment, "It's a pity?" He stopped halfway through his sentence. No matter what, Shangguan Wudi's wish was finally achieved. It was better not to say anything else, lest it desecrate this invincible heroic spirit. I hope that this invincible general, together with his beloved wife and son, will have a good journey and not be lonely in the afterlife. Handing the remains of Shangguan Wudi's family of 3 to Shangguan Lingxiu was the end of this trip to Ziyou. Yunyang truly wanted to rest for a while now. During this period of time, especially the last few days, he had been utterly exhausted. First, he had plotted and sneaked into Zilong City. He had been constantly on tenterhooks, contending with Ziyou's higher-ups. When he had finally met old Dugu, it had been a series of battles. When he had charged out of Zilong City, he had only managed to divert the Lunar River's water to the border of Zilong City in a state of near exhaustion. Although the diversion of the Lunar River's water seemed massive, Yunyang knew himself well. He could only divert a very small portion of the river's water. He would not be able to divert the entire Lunar River's water over even if he was beaten to death. The billowing white waves that everyone saw were real, but other than the monstrous waves at the front, there were only a few scattered streams of water at the back. It was not as massive as what Ziyou's people and officials had seen. The terrifying, boundless water was actually a bluff that Yunyang had created with his holy water charm. Life was like a show, it all depended on one's acting skills. If Yunyang's holy water charm cultivation base could really divert the entire Lunar River here, he would not have said that he would arrive in an hour, but in reality, it would not have taken him 4 hours to arrive. He was late. That was the real reason. Yunyang had exhausted all of his spiritual energy then, but he still could not successfully divert the Lunar River's water to the border of Zilong City. In the end, it was Emmy's great effort that had allowed him to divert a portion of the Lunar River's water over. In order to divert the Lunar River's water to this point, Yunyang had expended most of his spiritual energy. It could be said that Yunyang's condescending attitude towards Ziyou's people and officials was all a bluff. In spite of this, the incident with the little bear had once again drained a large portion of Yunyang's energy. When he left in the form of a stream and appeared to be relaxed to others, he was actually at the end of his tether. Yunyang had almost fainted in the stream. It was only with his willpower that he managed to hold on until he was far away from Ziyou's people's field of vision. Only then did he have the time to recover. It was also then that Emmy had told him about the little bear's death. That was how the trip to the dense forest had been made, bringing the little bear back to life and restarting his cultivation journey. Of course, the act of saving the little bear had drained the mystical chi that Yunyang had just recovered. When Yunyang landed on Shangguan Lingxiu's boat, it was the weakest and most helpless moment of his life. The only thing he felt was that he was extremely exhausted, his vision was darkening, and he could fall asleep at any time. If an enemy had coincidentally come at this time, Yunyang could only resign himself to his fate and allow himself to be trampled upon. The spiritual energy of vitality was not a universal remedy. At least, it was helpless against Yunyang's current state of exhaustion. Now that Shangguan Wudi's matter had come to an end, Yunyang felt that he could not hold on any longer. Without another word, he asked, "Lady Shangguan, can you prepare a quiet room for me? Don't let anyone disturb me. I need to rest." Upon hearing Lord Supreme Cloud's unexpected words, Shangguan Lingxiu understood immediately. Lord Supreme Cloud seemed to be exhausted these few days. What he had done was not something a normal human could do. No matter which one it was a miracle beyond imagination. How could there not be exhaustion after doing something like this? Even if one had an unparalleled cultivation base, one would have been completely drained after coming to this stage. Moreover, Supreme Cloud had never been known for his physical strength. "I have indeed neglected this," Shangguan Lingxiu said apologetically and immediately ordered that no one was allowed to go up to the 3rd level of the ship. After that, he directly vacated the largest bedroom on the 3rd floor, tidied up a little, and then quietly left. With a wave of Yunyang's hand, a cloud of fog materialized and settled at the door. This was the last safety measure that his mind, which was close to being muddled from exhaustion, could come up with. Once someone tried to force their way into the room and triggered the cloud, Yunyang would be alerted at once and react in time. Then he lay down on the bed and before his head even touched the pillow, he had already fallen asleep. In his sleep, Yunyang felt like he was in a trance, like he was in a dream, like he was in a trance. In a trance, he felt like he was reunited with his brothers again, the 9 of them going out on a mission together. A gentle and blissful smile hung on the corners of his lips. Eldest brother, second brother, third sister, fourth brother, fifth brother, sixth brother, seventh brother, eighth brother. What are we going to do today? The ambush fortress? Alright, I happen to have the information there. Wait for me, I'll come up with a plan. Something else today? Alright, I'll come up with a plan. Oh, ninth, don't tire yourself out. A balance between work and rest is the way to go in the long run. There's no need to rush. I'm not tired. How can I be tired? As long as everyone is together, I won't be tired no matter how much I do. I miss you all so much. In his sleep, Yunyang vaguely felt that something was amiss. He was with his brothers now, why was he missing them? Her brothers were all looking at her and smiling. Were they laughing at her foolishness? Right, fifth brother, have you found sister Yu? You picked her up, didn't you? Young brother? Yun Zuyu's silhouette appeared, the same smile on her face. Sister Yu, you've done me and then you've killed me, you've scared me to death. Yunyang bawled in his sleep. I thought I was the one who dragged you into this and caused your death. He cried as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. All the accumulated stress, grievances, and longing that had been buried in his heart poured out like a broken dam. Yunyang, who was sleeping quietly on the bed, wore a smile that came from the bottom of his heart, but the corners of his eyes were filled with tears. The laughter in his dream continued, the 9 Supremes were still carrying out their missions endlessly. Yunyang only hoped that the missions would never be completed. It would be best if there was always something to do. Because of this, everyone can always be together, together forever. It was a pity that no matter how many or how complicated the mission was, there would come a time when it came to an end. All the missions were completed, the speed of completion far exceeding Yunyang's expectations. The missions had been completed successfully, why would I still feel indignant? What was there to be indignant about? Looks like I've really tired myself out. Let's go and eat Chinese cabbage and tofu later. This was his eldest brother's suggestion. The brothers responded in unison. In the next moment, all 9 brothers had arrived at the small rundown tavern. Old Dugu's back was still hunched as he sat in front of the door, watching his brothers enter with a warm and comforting smile on his old face. It was like he was watching his long-lost sons return one after another. There was still a table for each of them, a plate of Chinese cabbage and tofu for each of them, a pot of wine for each of them. The refreshing aroma filled the entire narrow room. Yunyang ate greedily, feeling the warmth in his heart overflowing as he ate. It was too delicious. It was too delicious. He could not get enough of it no matter how much he ate. Yunyang realized that his dishes were all gone while his brothers still had a full plate in front of them. They were moving their chopsticks swiftly, eating contentedly. Like a child who had finished his candy first, or like Zhu Beiji who had eaten the ginseng fruit first, Yunyang who was salivating did not care about his image at all. He stood up and picked up his chopsticks, wanting to take another bite with a drooling face but was stopped by the crowd outside. You're not letting me eat. Yunyang was stunned. The eldest Supreme Earth raised his head. It was the eldest prince's face as he looked at Yunyang warmly. Oh, ninth, you can't eat what we're eating? What do you mean I can't eat? It's the same thing, I've just finished a plate. Yunyang was stubborn. I'll only take one bite. Just one bite. Brothers, can't you give this young brother a bite? Facing Yunyang, who had gone from being stubborn to acting coquettishly and shamelessly, the brothers were all smiling warmly. They looked at him but shook their heads resolutely, rejecting him. Old Dugu, with his hunched back, smiled kindly as he stood aside and said, Why are you so hung up on this? Isn't it easy if you want to eat? Didn't I teach you how to do it? If you want to eat, can't you cook it yourself? No. Yunyang was stubborn. I want to eat theirs. I want a bite from each of them. What's so special about cooking it myself? Before Yunyang's words echoed in his ears and heart, the small tavern suddenly disappeared. The big brothers were no longer in their original positions. They all stood up and walked away. 8 or 9 of them chatted and laughed as old Dugu followed behind them. They chatted and laughed as they walked into the distance. Surprisingly, no one paid any attention to him. Yunyang looked around, not knowing what to do. As far as his eyes could see, the sky was tens of thousands of miles high and the ground was covered in yellow sand. Looking into the distance, there was not a single cloud of smoke, not even a tree or a blade of grass. There were no living creatures in this land at all. In fact, he was the only living creature left in this entire world. Naturally, no one would care about him. Yunyang asked in a daze, Where are all of you going? Why didn't you bring me along? The dozen silhouettes further away were still conversing intimately with each other, their silhouettes moving further and further away. Still, no one responded to his question. Yunyang's anxiety grew as he dashed out. Wait for me. Wait for me. Let's go together. However, the group in front of him moved faster and faster, the distance between them growing further. The silhouettes on the other side gradually turned into a cluster of black dots before disappearing completely. Then Yunyang felt as if his brothers had turned into the stars in the sky. They were still blinking at him. Then the wind came, the rain came, and the snow came, torrential rains, floods, fires, lightning, tribulations, and countless catastrophes. Blood and fire intersected. In this devastated world, he was the only one left to struggle, to fight, and to roar. He needed help, he needed someone to accompany him on this journey. However, no one came. He was the only one holding on, while he was still in a trance. A figure swayed in front of him. Old Dugu appeared again with his hunched back. He still had that warm smile on his face as he looked at him with pity. "Child, go back. This is not a place for you." "I'm not going back." Yunyang roared, tears in his eyes as he said stubbornly, "I'm not going back." Old Dugu looked at him sympathetically and said softly, "Child, remember to take care of yourself in the future." As he spoke, he stretched out a hand and seemed to hesitate for a moment before slapping Yunyang's shoulder. Yunyang cried out, feeling his body retreating uncontrollably. Old Dugu, who was in front of him, was getting further and further away from him. Gradually he could not see him anymore, just like everyone else. Yet he was still flying back involuntarily. Yunyang struggled as he flew and roared, "I'm not going back. I don't want to go back. Don't even think of leaving me behind. You say we're brothers of one heart, you say we'll go through thick and thin together. Now you want to leave me behind? It won't be so easy." Yunyang roared, "There's no such thing in this world. I'll find all of you no matter where I go. Don't leave me alone. I'm the only one left in this world. What's the point if I'm alone? I'm the only one left. Can't you see? How much have I suffered? I can't take it anymore. I really can't take it anymore. Take me away. Take me with you. Take me with you. Wait for me. Big brothers, wait for me. Wait for me." Outside. Shengguan Lingxiu's face was wet with tears, her expression forlorn. She had been sitting here since yesterday while Supreme Cloud had slept for a day and a night. Later on, for some reason as if he had encountered a nightmare, he cried and screamed uncontrollably. His hoarse growls were heart-wrenching. She could hear Supreme Cloud's murmurs clearly. Although she could not understand most of it, she could still understand some of it. These were things that Supreme Cloud would never have said even if he was beaten to death when he was awake. He was a god in the empire of Yutong. A living god. How could he show such fragile emotions? Perhaps only when he was so tired that he couldn't support himself, so tired that he couldn't control his subconscious mind, coupled with the huge blow to his body and mind, when he really couldn't bear it, would he vent a little in the dream? Especially when he heard, "I'm not going back, I don't want to go back. Don't even think of leaving me behind. Don't leave me alone. I'm the only one left in this world. Can't you all see how much I'm suffering? I can't take it anymore. Take me away. I miss you all so much." Shengguan Lingxiu was sobbing her eyes out. If she were in his shoes, if she were Supreme Cloud and her brothers who had always been like brothers had all died in battle in a day, what would happen to her if she was left alone in this world? What was more, she would have to shoulder so many responsibilities when she was the only one left. Almost the entire empire's mental support was on her shoulders. She still had to take revenge. She still had to do things. She still had to shoulder responsibilities. She had to fight and kill. She had to face endless traps. She had to face all the despicable, filthy, noble, everything in this world. The spies in the imperial court, the forces of the martial world, the hostile countries, the 4 battlefields. All of these were originally the shared responsibilities of 9 people, each with their own division of labor and effort. Now that there was only one person left, the workload had multiplied. The loneliness, the desolation, the helplessness of being alone, yet he still had to press forward, to persevere with unwavering determination. Even a man of steel would not have been able to hold on for so long. It was said that the assassin from the Empire of Zio this time was a relative of one of the 9 Supremes. Supreme Cloud's arrival this time was to witness the passing of a relative with his own eyes. Even if he had slain countless enemies in this battle and won, what was the use? His king could not be brought back to life. He was even more lonely in this world. His heart was broken, his soul was broken as well. How had Lord Supreme Cloud been able to hold on? Even if it was just a dream, he had to send everyone away so that he could cry and curse in his sleep in a private space that belonged to him. Shengguan Lingxiu could empathize with the loneliness that bordered on despair. She felt like her heart was being torn apart. Shangguan Lingxiu could not imagine how strong one's body and mind must be to be able to withstand all of this. It's really him, Shangguan Lingxiu murmured with tears streaming down her cheeks. In fact, Shangguan Lingxiu had long suspected Supreme Cloud's identity, especially when the Eclipse Panther had come to report the news. Supreme Cloud was in the room just a door away. The Supreme Cloud in the dream did not conceal his real voice. Shangguan Lingxiu could tell who the original owner of the voice was. The Supreme Cloud who had always helped her, the Shangguan family of generals, the Empire of Yutong, the one who had been calm and composed in the face of the generals from the 4 countries was young Master Yun. Young Marquis Yun. The young Master Yun who always looked clean, as if no dust could ever land on him. That gentle and refined smile, that upright back view. Although he was known as a popinjay in the outside world, if one were to investigate carefully, one would only realize that there seemed to be no popinjay deeds that could be related to Yutong's popinjay leader, young Master Yun. No matter how glib his words were, she had never seen him bend his back even once, no matter when or where. The young Master Yun who looked at her and called her Sister Lingxiu with a faint smile. It's him. It's really him. Shangguan Lingxiu finally understood and understood a lot. No wonder I've always felt that Yun Yang has a lot of secrets. It's as if I can never get to the bottom of him. I can never understand what he's thinking, what he's pursuing, what he's aspiring for. No wonder I've always felt that this person is scheming and has never shown his true feelings. Even when he's laughing and cursing, even when he's throwing a tantrum, even when he's being unreasonable. However, everything was so illusory and unreal. It seemed that no matter what others saw, it wasn't the real him. So that's how it is. The Yun Yang in the eyes of the world is only an illusion, a complete illusion. Young brother Yun Yang is Supreme Cloud. He is the Lord Supreme Wind whom the entire Empire of Yutong regards as a god, the only savior. Along the way he had so many things weighing on his heart. How could he be relaxed? How could he show his true feelings? It was just that with so many things on his shoulders, he believed that if it was anyone else, most of them would have already collapsed from the pressure. However, he could still be as gentle as jade, no one could tell that he was at ease. However, deep in his bones, he was so lonely and cold that no one could understand him. No one could share his burden, not even a little. If it were not for the fact that he was on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion, who would have thought that he was actually Supreme Cloud? Chapter 447. Shangguan Lingxiu could only feel her heart trembling. Lord Supreme Cloud. In the room. Suddenly there was a loud thud. It was as if someone was sleeping and dreaming, but for some reason they suddenly fell off the bed. Then there was no more sound. Shangguan Lingxiu's heart skipped a beat as she wiped her tears away quickly. Almost at the same time the door finally opened with a squeak. Supreme Cloud's silhouette was still the same as when she had last seen him in Zilong City. He walked out calmly, his expression calm and his gaze sharp. Only his aura was as gentle and peaceful as ever, as if he had just woken up from a normal nap. He was brimming with energy and vigor. The uncontrollable hysteria in the dream could not be seen at all. As Supreme Cloud opened the door, he was not surprised to see Shangguan Lingxiu sitting on a chair a few feet away from him. Her face was propped up by her hand as if she was dozing off. In fact, Yun Yang dared not continue sleeping because he had sensed someone at the door. However, he could not help being stunned when he saw that it was Shangguan Lingxiu. "Why are you here, Lady Shangguan? Aren't you resting?" Shangguan Lingxiu smiled. "I've received many messages from the spiritual beast, so I went down to make some arrangements. I was really busy for a while. Lord Supreme Cloud has just woken up when I've just returned. Did you have a good sleep, Lord Supreme Cloud?" Yun Yang coughed and said with a smile, "I've never felt so good before." He mused and said, "Did Lady Shangguan hear anything when you were here just now? I seem to have heard someone shouting in my sleep just now." Shangguan Lingxiu was taken aback and said, "Someone shouted?" Yun Yang nodded. "No. Maybe it's just an illusion of me being in a dream." He smiled and said, "This time the Shangguan family of generals has finally gotten what they wanted. General Wudi's remains have been returned and his wish is fulfilled. However, I still have something to attend to. When I return to Tiantang, I'm afraid I won't be able to congratulate you personally. I apologize in advance." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled and said, "The Shangguan family will always remember Lord Supreme Cloud's kindness." Yun Yang waved his hand dismissively. "Forget it now. It's just something I did along the way, there's no need to worry about it." Shangguan Lingxiu did not want to linger on the topic, so she said kindly, "Sir, you must be hungry after sleeping for so long. What would you like to eat? I'll arrange for someone to do it immediately." Yun Yang's eyes flashed as he said slowly, "Is there cabbage and tofu on the ship? I want to make a dish by myself." Tofu with cabbage? Shengguan Lingxiu was visibly taken aback when she heard the name of the dish. Supreme Cloud had proposed to cook it himself in such a serious manner, but the ingredients were extremely common: cabbage and tofu. It would have been unexpected and unimaginable if anyone knew about it. Yes. Cabbage, a common dish that could be stored well, was naturally stocked on the ship. Although tofu was not a common ingredient on the ship, the Shengguan family of generals was well prepared for this trip and there seemed to be tofu in the storeroom. Shengguan Lingxiu paused and said, "I'll ask someone to make it for you right away." Shengguan Lingxiu's suggestion was a decision she had made after much deliberation. Yun Yang had said that he wanted to cook personally, but what he was making was the most common: cabbage and tofu. Perhaps he was using the most common ingredients and the most common taste to disguise his identity, or perhaps he was being cautious of himself. Or perhaps he was just like Shengguan Lingxiu, who did not know how to cook at all and had no choice but to make a cabbage and tofu to appease his hunger, continuing his disguise to the end. Shengguan Lingxiu, who felt that she understood Yun Yang's feelings and loved him even more, naturally wanted to help Yun Yang. She would personally supervise the chef later. The Chinese cabbage and tofu made by the chef would surely taste better than Lord Supreme Cloud, who did not seem to know how to cook. Yun Yang said slowly, "I said that I want to make it myself. I want to make this dish myself." "You're really going to make it yourself?" Shengguan Lingxiu's eyes widened. "You know how to cook?" Yun Yang smiled faintly. "I don't really know how to make other dishes, but this one." Shengguan Lingxiu watched in amazement from the side, watching as Lord Yun worked personally and busied himself. First, it was the 2 cabbages that had been carefully selected. Yun Yang peeled off all the leaves on the outer layer, leaving only a small ball of tender cabbage core on the innermost layer. Then he carefully peeled the tender core piece by piece and washed it with clean water using the holy water charm. Then he began the next step, cutting the meat, adding oil, seasoning, and so on. Basically, he had to think carefully about every step before he took action. Shengguan Lingxiu was growing more curious about a certain someone's actions. Yun Yang's every step seemed to be orderly, yet each step was like a pilgrimage. It was unprecedentedly solemn, serious, and meticulous. Each step was like a fixed program, not a single strand out of place. As the ingredients were placed into the wok and simmered, the aroma wafted out. Yun Yang closed his eyes at the right time and sniffed lightly, saying in an intoxicated tone, "It smells so good." Was it good? Did Chinese cabbage and tofu not smell like this? Was there anything special about it? Although Shengguan Lingxiu was a girl, she did not know how to cook. She had rarely been in the kitchen, but she had tasted her fair share of delicacies. Still, she could not see anything special or unique about Yun Yang's Chinese cabbage and tofu. Could it be that the uniqueness did not lie in the cabbage but in the tofu? The cooking process had come to the last step. When the tofu was added, the aroma grew thicker. However, when the Chinese cabbage had completely melted in the wok, the fire was extinguished and the lid was put back on. After a while, the Chinese cabbage and tofu dish came to an end. Shengguan Lingxiu was still filled with curiosity. Even if it was a success, what was the uniqueness of this dish? Lord Supreme Cloud was treating it so seriously, with such fanfare, treating it with such seriousness and focus. There must be something different about this dish. Yun Yang was not in a hurry to put it on the plate. He was still carefully identifying the aroma of the dish. Was it exactly the same as the Chinese cabbage and tofu that old Dugu had made in his memory? Finally, he sighed in satisfaction. Although the Chinese cabbage and tofu he had cooked was still a little lacking compared to the delicacy in his memory, it was not too far off. He believed that he could recreate the flavor of the past if he cooked it a few more times. "Do you have wine?" Shengguan Lingxiu smiled and said, "Of course. How can there be no wine on a ship filled with soldiers? Why don't I accompany Lord Supreme Cloud for a drink?" If it had been before she knew about Supreme Cloud's true identity, Shengguan Lingxiu would never have suggested this. Now that she knew that Supreme Cloud was Yun Yang, she wanted to accompany her lover for a meal. A strange expression flashed across Yun Yang's face before it disappeared as quickly as it came. He said softly, "I think I'll drink some myself." Shengguan Lingxiu was taken aback before she replied, "All right." She was surprised. Could this Chinese cabbage and tofu have some sort of rare history? What past was it tied to? Now, his gaze, expression, and temperament were really very strange. It was as if he was filled with an indescribable emotion. Yun Yang drank a mouthful of wine and ate a mouthful of Chinese cabbage and tofu. Every mouthful he took seemed to be meaningful in Shengguan Lingxiu's eyes. Yun Yang ate the whole afternoon of the huge pot of Chinese cabbage and tofu. He ate quietly on the wavering ship. His back was facing Shangguan Lingxiu, a dreamy glint flashing across his eyes from time to time. Just like that, the afternoon passed by quietly. Yun Yang was unusually quiet throughout the meal. Other than taking a mouthful of food and a sip of wine, he did not care about anything else. Whether it was the Nine Heavens dictum's message or anything else, he paid no attention to it. Shangguan Lingxiu felt that he was performing a solemn ritual that did not allow anyone or anything else to interfere. Finally he was done. Yun Yang exhaled a long breath and said quietly, "Thank you." Shangguan Lingxiu watched him eat the entire afternoon, starving, but she did not feel the passage of time at all. She asked curiously, "Lord Supreme Cloud, this Chinese cabbage and tofu, is there a reason behind it?" Yun Yang wore a forlorn smile and said, "There's no reason. It's just that, this is the most delicious dish I've ever eaten in my life. It's also my favorite dish. That's all." The most delicious dish. His favorite dish. Was that all? Shangguan Lingxiu made a mental note of it and said seriously, "I'll cook for Lord Supreme Cloud when I'm free next time." Yin Yang smiled. "Sure, I'll be sure to trouble you if there's a chance." He slowly stood up and said, "Time really passes in the blink of an eye. A day has passed just like that. It's really too fast. I have to rush back immediately. Your ship is moving too slowly. I have to go first." Shangguan Lingxiu said sincerely, "Lord Supreme Cloud, take care on your journey." Yun Yang nodded and soared into the sky without another word. With a swoosh, the colorful clouds in the sky gathered and the wind blew. A cloud floated away from the ship's bow. "Yutong is at war. Everyone, let us meet again on the battlefield." A howl echoed, but the silhouette in the sky had already disappeared without a trace. The 8,000 warriors below looked up at the same time, feeling an inexplicable sense of excitement. Lord Supreme Cloud was actually on their ship? Had he been traveling with them for so long? Along the way, Yun Yang had sent a few orders to Shui Wuyin. Search for the famous assassin ace cultivator Ouyang Xiaoshi's whereabouts at all costs. Assist Yutong's military in sending messages at all costs. Ensure the smooth flow of military intelligence. Mobilize the people at all costs. Protect my home and protect my homeland. Spread the news that Yutong's Supreme Cloud is already on the battlefield. Shui Wuyin, who had been anticipating the news of a certain someone's return, was rendered speechless. "Big brother, it's not easy for you to send a message back, but there are 3 pieces of information. No matter how I persuade you, you have to do your best at all costs. Can't you come up with something else? Is your vocabulary that lacking?" Although he understood Yun Yang's feelings, the prefixes of the 3 pieces of information were exactly the same. It was as if they were of equal importance. What kind of statement was that? However, Shui Wuyin was still more capable of self-analysis, analyzing the sequence of the 3 pieces of information on his own. Assisting Yutong's military had to be the top priority no matter what. This was an urgent matter. There could be no obstruction or delay. Then he would mobilize the people to protect their own homes. Only by working together could they overcome this crisis. These 2 pieces of information were actually a series of actions that came along with the flow. As for Ouyang Xiaoshi's news, it was placed at the end of the list. It was already a time of crisis. Relevant clues, especially when it was a relatively unfamiliar name, had to be temporarily shelved. It would not be too late to search for this person's tracks when Yutong's war was averted. As for the news that Supreme Cloud had already gone to the battlefield, Shui Wuyin had already released the news before Yun Yang had issued the order. Halfway through his journey back to the east, Yun Yang was surprised to see the Empire of Ziyou's army retreating from the front line like a long dragon. It was an army that was already halfway to the battlefield, waiting to reinforce it. Further ahead, there were many more troops who were setting up camp and packing up. It looked like the Empire of Ziyou was really going to withdraw from the four-nation siege this time. Since this was the case, Yun Yang did not waste any more time on the Empire of Ziyou's side. He took a detour to the southern border and rushed to reinforce it. Compared to the northern battlefield, Yun Yang was relatively more assured about Taizheng. Since he was going to reinforce, he had to make a round trip before returning. If he were to travel in a straight line, the time would be much shorter, but he would inevitably waste a lot of places that could be taken care of. When Yun Yang arrived at the southern border, the war between De Yuan and Yutong had already erupted. The battle was intense and unusually brutal. The marshal of Yutong's southern border, who was facing the empire of De Yuan's massive military force, was Leng Daoyin's eldest son, Leng Shan. The southern border's Marshal Lung Shan was at a critical juncture where he was overwhelmed and flustered. Lung Shan's military talent and cultivation, strategy and tactics were not inferior to the other party. No, it should be said that Lung Shan's military talent was not inferior to anyone in this world. In the past, it was only because he was the son of Yutong's Marshal Lung Daoyin that his reputation was slightly inferior to that of Fu Baogua, Yang Buotao, and Tai Zheng. With such a capable general holding the fort, the southern border should be worry-free. The truth was as it was said. Those who were good at fighting did not have much merit. There were almost no urgent reports from the southern border because of this young Marshal Lung. However, the situation this time was different, completely different. Young Marshal Lung, who could not cook without rice, only had a total of 300,000 soldiers at his disposal. 300,000 soldiers sounded like a lot, but they had to face the empire of Deyuan's 800,000 soldiers who were attacking from multiple directions. Not only was the situation not optimistic, it was perilous. The disparity in military strength had caused them to be completely suppressed from the start of the battle. First, the 50,000 middle troops were suppressed on the front line, unable to move at all. Once they moved, it would definitely lead to the collapse of one side of the battle line. You could defeat one side, but how would you deal with the other three sides? If any one side was breached, it would be the beginning of a complete defeat. Lung Shan's lips were blistering. Facing the other party's frenzied attack, he could only use all his skills and counter every move that came his way. As for retaliating forcefully, he could not do it for the time being. This battle is completely different from the past. There's only one thing I can guarantee now. Lung Shan faced the group of generals and said coldly, "Before we are all dead, we will not allow the Deyuan army to take a single step into the southern border. Outside the gates of the country, this is the motto of the soldiers of the southern border, till death do us part." Every general had already written their wills and made arrangements for their deaths. In the face of such a dangerous situation, they no longer had the calmness of the past, because no one had the confidence to leave this battlefield alive. However, everyone had the same thought in their hearts: before I die, I must kill a few more Deyuan soldiers. Killing only one would be a loss, it would not be worth it. This is my last order. Every soldier of the southern border, even if you have to die, you must kill at least 4 Deyuan soldiers before you die. Lung Shan's voice was cold. If we can do this, then we can still fight for the victory of the southern border, even if we have to perish together with the enemy. Even if we perish together, we swear to not lose the southern border. The soldiers raised their arms and cheered, their eyes filled with the color of blood. In the distance, the sound of a horn once again sounded shrilly. Deyuan's new wave of all-out attack had begun once again. Fight. Lung Shan's face was as hard as steel. This battle may be the last for all of us. It is very likely that the command will not be smooth, so I hereby give my last order. Every unit, fight on your own. Fight to the death. Even if the commanding general dies in battle, the army will not fall into chaos. The deputy general will immediately be promoted to the commanding general. If the deputy general dies in battle, the deputy general will take his place. So on and so forth, rank by rank. My request to all of you is, even if your army is left with only 10 people, you must not fall into chaos. You must not fall. Fight. Fight, fight, fight. Even if we are bathed in blood, we must ensure that the front line does not fall. The generals shouted in unison, their voices extremely fierce. However, just as they turned around and were about to stride out of the commander's tent, an unforeseen event suddenly happened. Whoosh, 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 the wind around them began to howl inexplicably. Right now, the normal wind was from the south. Yutong's army was in a position where it was against the wind. The first 2 factors were disadvantageous to them, but now, the southerly wind that had been howling just a moment ago had suddenly turned into a howling northerly wind. That wasn't all. The wind was getting stronger and stronger, as if it was getting stronger and stronger. Even though it was the middle of winter and it was normal for the north wind to blow, such a change in the weather was extremely abnormal. Lung Shan watched as the marshal's flag fluttered abnormally. Suddenly, a thought struck him as he exclaimed in delight. Could it be, as if his words had awakened them from their dreams? A strong sense of hope appeared in the eyes of all the generals present. The wind has changed. Could it be that the 9 Supreme Lords have arrived? Just thinking about it made everyone's blood boil, and they were indescribably excited. Everyone knew that the most dangerous part of the war was the eastern front line. Han Sanha's army was pressing down on the border. Although Fu Baogua had the geographical advantage, his total military strength was far from the enemy's. The war was dire. Once the eastern front line was breached, the country would be in danger of annihilation. The southern border, on the other hand, was the most stable side in the past. It was also the side that the Nine Supremes had sent the least amount of reinforcements. Therefore, no one had expected the Nine Supremes to appear on the southern border. What was more, there was only one Nine Supremes Lords left now. They could not afford to be distracted at all. Therefore, the generals had not held out much hope for the Nine Supremes' reinforcements. The Nine Supremes Lords should have appeared in the eastern defense. Now, in the midst of life and death and defeat, they were pleasantly surprised to learn that the Nine Supremes had arrived. Lung Shan was the first to sprint out. Standing in the open space, he looked up at the sky. Observing the movements around him, he confirmed it again and again. The northern wind was howling louder and louder, its sound growing more forlorn. Countless tree branches were actually snapped off and flew over from an unknown place, crashing into the Dayuan army on the other side. At the same time, the snow and ice on the ground began to melt bit by bit amidst the howling northern wind. After a while, the Dayuan army suddenly lit up as far as the eye could see. It was as if a single spark had started a prairie fire. After a few dozen breaths, the sparks had already turned into a sea of fire that swept towards the south. Lung Shan could instantly tell that it was Dayuan's army's tents, barracks and supplies. They were all engulfed by the sea of fire. Amidst the blazing flames, dark clouds once again covered the sky. Amidst the dark clouds, the god of thunder beat the war drum as if he was playing along. Thunder and lightning were about to descend to the mortal world, like a lightning punishment from the heavens, wreaking havoc in the mortal world. It really is the Nine Supremes Lords. Lung Shan was overjoyed at the sight of the natural disasters wreaking havoc in Dayuan's base. He raised his arms and shouted, "Change of strategy. Attack with all troops, counterattack with all our might. We will not return without victory." Chapter 448. The sonorous sound of a horn rang out as the war drums of the entire military base thumped loudly. Someone was shouting crazily, "The Nine Supremes Lords are here. The Marshal has ordered the entire army to attack and counterattack. We will not return until we win. We will not return until we win." On the other side, Dayuan's camp was in a state of complete chaos. Many of the generals wore expressions of despair and dejection. Victory was right in front of them and the golden opportunity to break through the southern border's defense was within reach. Why had the Nine Supremes come? The empire of Dayuan's marshal stared blankly at the raging northern wind in the sky, the sparks around him and the lightning bolts in the sky. Suddenly he spat out a mouthful of blood. "Isn't this a trap?" He mumbled in a daze. "Didn't the empire of Zio say that they've trapped Supreme Cloud? Are they about to annihilate the Nine Supremes? Why would Supreme Cloud suddenly appear here? Why is this happening? If you can't trap him, you should have said so earlier. Now that he's here, his manifestation powers are even more powerful than the Nine Supremes' combined power. Won't the lives of hundreds of thousands of Empire of Dayuan's disciples be buried in the false information? This is... You should have said so earlier. You could have said so earlier. If you had, this old man would have set up a formation to defend against the Nine Supremes' attack. Even if we still couldn't defend ourselves, we wouldn't have suffered such a heavy loss like we are now." It was at this moment that the situation continued to develop in a direction that was not in the Empire of Dayuan's favor. The color of blood suddenly lit up. All the soldiers of the Empire of Dayuan who had been injured before, without exception, felt the blood in their bodies boiling for some reason. It even gushed out from their wounds like a spring. Even those with better physiques would feel extremely weak. As for those with weaker physiques, those who had lost too much blood would immediately die in the blood bank. At least thousands of soldiers had perished because of this. As the northern wind continued to howl, the fire that rose from Dayuan's base grew more and more unstoppable. It soared into the sky and spread towards the south. Behind them, Yutang's army seemed to be aided by God as they charged forward energetically, their morale soaring to an unprecedented level. Just as Yutang's army charged forward and their fighting spirit was at its peak, the northern wind surged once more. As a result, the Dayuan army, who was in a disadvantageous position, did not even have the chance to engage in battle. They were already blown so hard by the northern wind that they could not even open their eyes. How could they possibly defend themselves against the attacks of the snow-white blades? Great spears and long swords flashed with a cold glint, and wherever they passed, blood splattered everywhere. In a single breath, the boundless sea of fire spread out for almost 1,000 miles. Faced with the attacks of the countless anomalies, the combat power of the Dayuan army was reduced to a freezing point. As a matter of fact, the number of casualties among the Dayuan army was not that high. At the very least, compared to the total number of soldiers in the army of 800,000, the number of casualties was far from enough to cause the entire army to collapse. In spite of this, the sudden appearance of the power of heaven and earth, the power of nature, and the name of the 9 Supremes made Dayuan's army lose the will to fight. Almost from the very beginning, the process of defeat had begun. The northern wind blew strongly, the flames filled the sky, thunder and lightning intersected, and the color of blood filled the sky. In the following 2 days and 2 nights, Dayuan's army could only be in a state of collapse, a state of utter defeat. When Dayuan's army could finally reorganize their military forces, they were shocked to realize that they had already retreated more than 800 miles away. Don't move, reorganize everyone. We have lost this battle. Yutong's morale is high. We must be wary of the enemy's pursuit. Be careful. Yutong's side was filled with thunderous cheers. Everyone was so excited that their chests felt like they were about to explode. Everyone had thought that they were going to die for their country in this battle, but who would have thought that the 9 Supremes would suddenly arrive and turn their obvious defeat into a great victory? Lung Shan stood at the highest point of the military camp and shouted, "Lord Supreme Wind, Lung Shan and all my brothers, thank you for your help. I wonder if Lord Supreme Wind can come down for a chat?" Zio's news had yet to reach here, so Lung Shan still thought that the person in front of him was Lord Supreme Wind and no one else. Once he spoke, the entire battlefield was silent, waiting for the person in the sky to appear. All the warriors lifted their heads, gazing at the sky with excitement and longing. They wondered if Lord Supreme Wind could come down for a chat? The wind and clouds in the sky surged as a silhouette appeared quietly among the clouds. "The eastern border is in an emergency, I must rush over as soon as possible. Marshal Lung has always guarded the southern border without negligence. As long as we don't advance rashly, the southern border will be safe. Brothers of the southern border, we shall meet again when Marshal Lung returns to the capital." The cheers were thunderous. "It's a promise, Lord Supreme Wind is mighty." The sound of the wind rose again as Lord Supreme Wind's silhouette disappeared. The gale billowed as it sped towards the northeast, its momentum shaking the heavens. "Brothers, it's up to us now." Lung Shan shouted excitedly, "Lord Supreme Wind has already laid the foundation for our victory. If we still lose this battle, we might as well hang ourselves. Otherwise we'll be a laughing stock." "Aha," the generals guffawed. "This time, we'll definitely beat Dayuan's children until they run away." High up in the sky, Yunyang, who had turned into a breeze, was sprinting at full speed. The wind howled, sharp as a knife. Whitey 3's legs had long been reattached, but its injuries had yet to heal, so it was still very weak. The current situation was very different from before. Yunyang, who had recovered his manifestation powers, naturally would not use the 2 Whitey's gliding ability. Instead, he nurtured the 2 Whitey's physical bodies with the air of vitality as he traveled, hugging them in his arms. The southern border's war was unexpectedly smooth. The crisis of the southern border had been resolved with just one battle. There were no other worries, so of course Yunyang was happy. To be fair, Yunyang had not expected the matter to be resolved so easily. Dayuan's army had actually formed a 10-sided cylindrical formation that relied purely on their advantage in military strength, allowing Yunyang's power of wind and fire to be put to good use. With such a change in the situation, Dayuan must have already known that Supreme Cloud is trapped in Zio. That's why the generals have launched such an unbridled attack. Other than Supreme Cloud's inability to come to help, it's also because young Marshal Lung's defensive prowess is renowned in the world. To break through his defense in the shortest time possible, it's indeed best to use such an advantageous military force to seal off all 4 sides and attack without regard for the cost. However, my sudden arrival has changed the situation, leading to this unexpected yet reasonable defeat. Does this mean that Zio has helped me? Yunyang was rather amused by the thought. Yunyang's speculation was basically in line with the truth. This was the only reason that could explain Dayuan's marshal, who had led troops for his entire life, making such a foolish arrangement. Of course, there was also the fact that Yunyang's manifestation powers had improved tremendously. In the past, even when there were 9 Supremes reinforcements, there would not be more than 4 or more of the 9 Supremes gathered on one side. Now, however, Yunyang himself was equivalent to 6 of the 9 Supremes, and his manifestation powers had far surpassed the power that Supreme Wind, Flame, and the others could unleash. The combination of his manifestation powers had greatly surpassed the previous 9 Supremes' immense power. It was also the key to turning the tide of this war around. Although we've won this war, it's still a fact that Yutong's national strength is gradually weakening. Yunyang was worried. The southern border is the side that Yutong has suffered the least casualties throughout the years. That's why there are 300,000 soldiers. However, other than these 300,000 southern border troops, the other reinforcements, including those who are still on the way, don't exceed 100,000 men. It's really difficult to help the overall situation. The country is at a critical juncture. The moment of survival has finally arrived. Now, only the eastern defense can be stabilized and Han Sanhe's troops will be defeated. Yutong will then have at least 5 years of recuperation. Yunyang's gaze turned even colder as he made up his mind. Amidst the raging wind and clouds, he sped up. However, just as Yunyang was moving at his maximum speed, an inexplicable sense of danger rose from the bottom of his heart. Yunyang stopped abruptly. In the next moment, the cloud manifestation that was riding on the wind dispersed abruptly, turning into wisps of cool breeze. Although the cloud manifestation had form but no substance, it was still tangible and traceable. It was not as good as the wind manifestation, which had truly blended into heaven and earth and could not be seen by the naked eye. Yunyang had long been prepared for the enemy's ambush. The reason was very simple. It was because the journey back home had been too smooth, so smooth that it was unexpected and even unreasonable. In fact, Yunyang had been waiting ever since he had left Zilong City. His sudden attack in Zilong City could be said to have been an abrupt change. The Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nyen might not have been able to make it in time due to the unexpected turn of events. This was still within reason and understandable. However, when he had gone on a killing spree and charged out of Zilong City for a few days, there was still no movement. This was not normal. In the eyes of an ordinary person, this was a long distance that would require half a year's journey, but for a peerless cultivator like Mr. Nyen, who possessed earth-shattering skills, it would not take long. He had been racing to the southern border and had fought the war, but the other party had yet to appear. There must be something fishy about this. Therefore he was on high alert. It was not a surprise that a threat had arrived. It could only be summed up in 4 words: he had indeed come. That was all. Yunyang dared not be negligent. He retracted his cloud manifestation and turned into a breeze, concealing himself completely. Only then did he carefully examine his surroundings. Beneath him was a forest that stretched on endlessly. Snow fluttered in the air, blanketing the area in silver. The forest rose and fell, stretching on endlessly. There did not seem to be anything out of the ordinary that he could see. In spite of this, the sense of danger in Yunyang's heart did not diminish. Instead, it grew stronger. The whistling wind stopped as Yunyang stared ahead, deep in thought. If there was danger, the source of the danger must be in the space in front of him. However, there was nothing out of the ordinary in this space. Could it be that there's another spiritual restraining formation ahead? But this isn't possible, is it? Yunyang frowned. The speed of my wind and cloud manifestation is unparalleled in this world. No one can surpass me. Besides, I've unexpectedly rushed to the southern border first. My tracks are hard to predict. After taking such a big detour, who can catch up to me and set up a spiritual restraining formation on a path that I must pass through without any prior signs? What's more, it's above such a huge stretch of forest. If it's not a spiritual restraining formation, what kind of dangerous trap is there? It can't be a direct kill, can it? With my current ability and cultivation base, as long as my manifestation powers aren't sealed, even if Mr. Nyen were to attack me personally, he might not be able to do anything to me. Yunyang pondered. Speaking from the bottom of his heart, Yunyang had always been extremely confident in his manifestation powers. However, when he had caught a glimpse of Mr. Nyen's technique against Lei Dongtian from afar, it was truly breathtaking. He was 30% fearful, 30% fearful, and 40% surprised by its unfathomable prowess. It was at this moment that a sharp sword energy suddenly soared into the sky, coming straight for him. Yunyang did not even have the time to sense where the sword energy had come from. The moment he realized it, the sword chi had already covered the sky and the earth, and the surprise attack had already arrived. The sword energy whistled as the abundant sword energy crushed everything within the space where Yunyang was. Even the shapeless wind and the shapeless clouds were torn apart. Even though Yunyang had already turned into a breeze, he could not help but grunt. The power of this sneak attack was actually able to harm the wind and clouds. Yun Yang's manifestation could clearly feel that he had been injured amidst this wave of sword light and sword waves. Furthermore, this kind of sword chi had a very strange, or perhaps it could be said to have a very strange power. It was as if it had an inexplicable control over the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. To be more precise, it was a vague tendency to engulf it. It was only at this moment that Yun Yang was truly shocked. What cultivation method was this? How could it possess such an unfathomable power? How could there be such a sword energy in this world? Not only could it engulf spiritual chi, it could even produce an engulfing effect on his manifested form of wind and cloud. Even when he had completely turned into a breeze, he was still vaguely pulled by it. Amidst the shock, Yun Yang scrutinized it carefully and was even more shocked to realize that the strange sword energy was not only engulfing spiritual chi and interfering with the manifestation of wind and cloud, it could also cause considerable damage to his soul. Yun Yang had never encountered such a thing before. After the sword light flashed, it disappeared without a trace. Yun Yang had used all his deific consciousness, but he still did not see how the sword light had disappeared. It was obvious that the other party's art of sword manipulation had reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship, the acme of perfection. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.